Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Scion Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What if Deku becomes Koro Sensei disciple? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Eat this, All Might had said, his voice carrying the weight of the world. Izuku hesitated only for a moment. His dream of becoming a hero was finally within reach, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. With a deep breath, he swallowed the hair. He shouldn't feel disappointed that nothing strange happened. After all, he had been a worthless Deku for so long. Did he think that anything would change? I don't feel any different, All Might. Never fear, my boy, it takes time to digest after all. I suggest going home and getting a good night's rest. After all, you're going to need it. He sighed. All Might was right, he did need a good night's rest. So, he went home, ignoring as he fell into bed a surge of warmth from deep within. He wouldn't know it, but he'd had a quirk the whole time, a quirk that sat unable to be used, not that Izuku knew that. He slept on, unaware that come morning his mother would go to wake him, only to find an empty room. Time skip. The UA entrance exam was a big deal, but Midoriya Izuku approached it with an unnerving calm. He wasn't wearing the standard uniform or gym clothes like everyone else. Instead, he was clad in a dark green blazer with the number 3E stitched on the sleeve and a crescent moon upon the collar. His expression was focused and determined, yet oddly detached from the chaos around him. Izuku didn't run toward the faux villains like the other examinees. Instead, he took to the shadows, sticking to the walls, blending in with his environment, and observing. He didn't need to showcase flashy moves or brute strength, his skills were honed in silence and secrecy. When the robots were distracted by the flashy quirks of other students, he slipped by unnoticed, carefully planting his knives into their weak points. This is just like training, Izuku thought to himself. Stay calm. Stay hidden. Strike only when necessary. From his concealed vantage points, he threw knives with pinpoint accuracy, hitting vital circuits and joints on the faux villains. His actions went largely unnoticed by the other students, who were too focused on their battles. But one man noticed. Aizawa Shouta, the underground hero Eraserhead, watched the screens intently. Something about this green-haired boy set off alarms in his mind. The way he moved, the precision of his strikes, and the calmness in his eyes, it was all too familiar, yet disturbingly out of place for a child applying to a hero school. Flashback. His hand trembled as he clutched the gun they'd been given for today's lesson. He swallowed hard, trying not to let his nerves show. This wasn't what he wanted to be a hero, not an assassin. But here he was, stuck in a world that wasn't his own, sitting in a class that trained students to kill. He still remembered the first day he arrived, looking up at the destroyed moon and realizing this wasn't his home. A trip to the library confirmed that this world was different in ways that left him reeling. He tried to adapt, to survive. He'd even learned how to hack into systems to create a birth certificate and ID for himself because not going to school would have drawn too much attention. But every day was a battle against instincts and morals he wasn't sure he could reconcile. Present, Izuku said aloud, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside. He kept his finger off the trigger, forcing himself to focus on the task without firing. You didn't even try, Izuku. Please stay after class. He'd hoped to keep his head down, just stay unnoticed for long enough to figure out how to return home. He can't lose hope that he'll return home. His mom is waiting. All Might is waiting. He doesn't belong here. But if he doesn't do what he's told, he'll draw unwanted attention to himself. He can't have that. He doesn't want anyone to know he has abilities anything like Koro Sensei. He's already seen what they do to people that are a threat. Even if he doesn't know how to use either All Might's quirk or the quirk that had sent him here, he has to believe he'll find a way home. He has to. Present. Nedzu, the principal of UA, watched the footage from the entrance exam with a smile. He had added a secret component to the test this year, awarding points for stealth, strategy, and the ability to bring hidden weapons into the battle. It was meant to test the students on more than just brute strength. And one student had excelled far beyond expectations. Interesting, Nedzu murmured, his eyes twinkling with curiosity. Midoriya Izuku, you might be the most intriguing candidate we've ever had. Class 1A, huh? That's amusing. Koro Sensei would be proud if he could see that one of us got to be in an classroom. He can't help scanning, looking at the windows, the door, and the few classmates who are already seated. He hears the familiar pop, pop of explosions, but he doesn't flinch. Karasuma had ensured he had training with assembling, disassembling and even throwing bombs until that particular trait had ceased. No assassin would be able to complete missions if they couldn't stand the noise of a bomb or two. Deku. What are you doing here? I thought I told you not to bother applying. I passed the entrance exam, same as you. He can't say he didn't enjoy the look of stupefied constipation on Katsuki's face as he calmly sat at his desk. "Oh hey, you're that weird kid with the knives." He turns to see the brunette, the girl who had been trapped under the rubble. The girl who he'd walked through a calming technique as he had her use her quirk on the rubble as he pried it up with his knife. And just what is a UA student doing with knives? That has to be against school rules. A loud boy with bright blue hair says as he chops his hand up and down robotically. He rolled his eyes. "I got permission. Rules say that if I'm carrying I just have to submit the paperwork to say what it is I'm carrying and prove to the weapons master snipe that I can handle them. Both of which I've done." The blue-haired boy sputters, but he ignores him. "Sit your butt down and quiet down, blue boy, before the teacher over there gives us detention." He watches the teacher's eyebrow raise from the yellow cocoon of a sleeping bag he emerges from for a second. When he'd noticed the teacher his breath had caught. There was a reason he couldn't look at his favorite yellow backpack anymore, or anything yellow. Flashback. He couldn't help staring at the government agent as he brought in the target. A yellow, smiling octopus-like creature floated into the room, wearing a teacher's gown. His many tentacles moved fluidly, and his round face bore an unsettlingly cheerful grin. The creature introduced himself as their new homeroom teacher. Is this a quirk? He wondered, his analytical mind kicking into overdrive. He had seen many quirks in his time, but nothing like the creature who could move impossibly fast, demonstrated when the government agent shot a bullet at the creature. This is the creature who blew up the moon, and he's going to blow up the Earth. You all have been voluntold to assassinate him before this can happen. What have I gotten myself into? He can't help thinking as the agent continues to explain how they will be given real guns and realistic knives. Real guns with special bullets that can only hurt the creature. Realistic knives that do the same. It's insane. Present. If you're here to make friends, you're in the wrong course. Now take one of these uniforms and head to the training field. He changes quickly and is one of the first out on the field. We're having a quirk assessment today. Bakugo, what's your record for the ball throw? 60 meters, sir. Use your quirk. He dodges the attempt by Katsuki to elbow past him, watching as the boy who'd been his best friend lines up a shot. Katsuki winds up, die, a loud explosion rocks the air, but that's not what has his hand twitching for his knife, trained instinct screaming at him to neutralize the threat. It took everything in him to resist, to remind himself that this wasn't an assassination mission. He wasn't in Class 3E anymore. The teacher shows them all the scores on his screen, an impressive 700 meters. For a moment, he turns, looking for Nagisa, who always kept track of their talents. A throw like that would be perfect for an assassination attempt. Then he shook his head. Nagisa wasn't here. Koro Sensei wasn't here. He didn't have to think about any more attempts. The entrance exam is pointless. This is where you need to prove your worth. You mean we get to use our quirks? This will be fun. He stiffened at her words, memories flashing through his mind. Karasuma would have our heads if we thought assassination training was fun. Fun? There's nothing fun about this. Heroics isn't fun, it isn't easy, it's hard work. But since you think it's fun, how about we add a little difficulty? The person who places last will be expelled. Karasuma would agree. He finds himself nodding. At least something is familiar in hero school. He doesn't use his quirk for any of the tests. He doesn't want to break something like he had when he'd reacted by punching one of the robots instead of throwing one of his knives at it. To be fair, he'd been running low on knives at that point, and he didn't want to lose his one and only anti-sensei knife. That knife was sentimental. Also, these tests were nothing compared to the torture Takayaka put them through. He thought he was doing rather well until it came down to the last test. If you keep holding back, I'll expel you. He frowns. I don't know what you mean, sir. I saw you use your quirk in the entrance exam. Do you think I would let you continue in this course if you won't take it seriously? For a moment, he sees Takayaka again, and he almost wonders if he'll have to watch for poisons with this teacher too. No, he's a hero, not an assassin. He reminds himself. Fine. He'll use his quirk. His stupid secondary, bone-breaking quirk that he still has no flipping clue how to use. He winds his arms back, trying to remember All Might's advice. Something about an egg in a microwave. But that's stupid. He loves All Might, he does, but the blonde is kinda an expert in using one for all perfectly. All Might could use it perfectly because he was perfect. Not like him. But still, he has to do something. He remembered Sugino, remembered Koro Sensei telling him to do things his way. Off course. He picks up the ball, getting into the pitcher's stance that Sugino had taught them all to do. He reaches deep within, to the ball of energy he learned was his quirk, and envisioned it looping from his core muscles to his arm, back to the core muscles. Red lines appeared on his arms, and as he let go, he pushed with just one finger. There was a huge crack noise as well as a snap from his finger. He looks over to see Aizawa smiling, showing the screen 701 meters. Deku. How dare you hide your quirk from me? Die! Katsuki lunged at him, explosions crackling in his palms. The world slowed down, and his body moved on its own. In a fluid motion, he ducked under Katsuki's arm, sidestepping the blast, and in an instant, his anti-sense knife was at Katsuki's throat. Katsuki wouldn't know the knife wouldn't hurt him. Only he knew that. Gasps echoed around them as the other students froze in shock. Katsuki's eyes widened, and for the first time, he looked truly taken aback. Don't provoke me, Kaken, he said softly as he slowly pulled the knife away, his heart pounding in his chest. Katsuki growled, rage simmering beneath his skin, but for once, he held his tongue. Aizawa stepped forward, breaking the tense silence. That's enough, both of you, he said, his voice firm. This is a quirk assessment, not a battlefield. Keep your conflicts out of it. He nodded, sheathing his knife with a hand that only slightly trembled. Aizawa's words echoed in his mind. This isn't a battlefield. But to Izuku, it felt like one. Every moment, every interaction was a fight for survival, a struggle to keep his darker instincts in check. Something was really off about the green-haired student. The one from the exams with the knives. He'd noticed it first when he inched into the room, quietly as he always did. It was always somewhat amusing to him, seeing which students would notice him first. Not many did. But that wasn't what caught his attention. It was while watching the green-haired kid casing the room the same way pro underground heroes did, and then the green-haired kid had pointed right at him, telling Ida to sit down and be quiet before he got in trouble. No one had seen him that quickly before. Not when he was being silent. But that wasn't the only red flag. The student who he found out was Izuku Midoriya, from his name on the registration papers. He didn't miss the way that Izuku was one of the first students out on the field. Looking around, hand on the hilt of a knife he could see poking out of a pocket that the kid seemed to have made before coming onto the field. The fact that the kid had spent the time to ensure he had a weapon on him was unusual in the extreme. Then when Bakugo had screamed, "Die!" he watched Izuku's hand twitch for the knife, but the kid didn't pull it thankfully. Not that he doubted Snipe, his colleague would have never permitted Izuku to have knives if Snipe didn't think he could handle them. He'd have to say something to Nezu though. That kind of preparedness didn't come without training. He watches closer through the assessment, he's both not and very impressed with Izuku. Impressed because the kid hadn't used his quirk once in the tests and yet he beat out Ida in his running time, as well as achieving top scores in the side step, the toe touch, and the long jump. Not impressed because the kid wasn't using his quirk. Izuku is on the last test, the ball throw, when he stops the kid. If you keep holding back I'll expel you. I don't know what you mean, sir. I saw you use your quirk in the entrance exam. Do you think I would let you continue in this course if you won't take it seriously? He knows the kid has a quirk, he hadn't used it much, preferring to use his knives, but there had been one part of the exam where Izuku had used his quirk to punch through a robot before using one of his knives. He watches as Izuku steps into a pitcher's stance, and then red lightning lights up the kid's arms, a crack is heard and the ball goes flying. He sees the kid's finger is a deep purple, but he isn't even flinching from the pain he must be feeling. Another red flag. Deku. How dare you hide your quirk from me? Die! He's a beat too slow as Bakugo lunges for Izuku, palms sparking. He watches Izuku duck under Katsuki's arm, sidestepping the blast, and in an instant, Izuku's knife is at Katsuki's throat. That wasn't an accident, Izuku had moved too fluidly for that, it was instinct. The same killer instinct that some of his darker missions required. Missions he'd never even told his husband about, missions he never told Nezu about, though he thinks Nezu knew all too well, for it was underground heroes who had helped him escape the lab so long ago. But to see that sort of killer instinct, to feel it in a student under his care? That was something he was going to have to investigate. He hears the class gasping as Katsuki's eyes widen, looking fearfully at his classmate, no bravado to be seen. He knows he needs to do something to break the killer instinct that he can almost feel in the air. That's enough, both of you, he said, his voice firm. This is a quirk assessment, not a battlefield. Keep your conflicts out of it. He can feel the killer instinct as it reels back into Izuku as if it had never happened, watching as Izuku sheaths the knife. Thankfully that's the end of the day. He's going to have to keep a closer eye on Izuku. Instinct like that speaks of training, deadly training. He doesn't know if he should be advocating for Izuku's removal from the hero course, but the way Izuku held that knife he knew that while he'd have to file an incident report, Izuku hadn't done anything other than scare a classmate with a weapon that he had both license to use and training to keep himself from using it without thought. It still troubled him though. What happened that you can react like that? He doesn't know, and that is the most terrifying aspect of the whole thing. Toshinori Yagi had thought he had picked right when he fixed his mistake with Midoriya. Midoriya, who was a fanboy, shed tears as he sat on top of the fridge that was the last of the garbage to be moved and screamed his triumph to the world. But watching at the edge of the training field, looking for his successor, ready to comfort him just in case he was expelled, he couldn't help noticing. Noticed as Izuku moved with precision, effortlessly navigating the challenges with a level of ease that wasn't entirely unfamiliar. But something was very wrong. The spark that usually lit up his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, dead look that sent a chill down All Might's spine. Izuku wasn't smiling, wasn't showing the usual excitement that usually graced his face as he pushed his limits. Instead, he was focused, almost mechanical in his movements. Then, he watched as his successor sidestepped a blonde boy's explosive attack, brandishing a knife to the blonde's throat, no hesitation in his eyes, no shaking of the hands to show that this was a new thing for his successor. His heart pounded in his chest as he watched Izuku's expression, his face a mask of eerie calm. His stomach churned as he tried to process what he was seeing. The pressure in the air was suffocating, the tension so thick it was almost palpable. He had felt killing intent before, in the eyes of hardened villains, and when he faced All for One, but never not once had he ever expected to feel it from Izuku. The knife lowered, and just like that, the moment was over. Izuku stepped back, the blank expression on his face melting into something more neutral, but the damage was done. The fear, the shock, had already taken root in the hearts of those who had witnessed it. All Might's hands clenched into fists at his sides as he struggled to reconcile what he had just seen. This wasn't the successor he had chosen, the boy who had once looked up at him with admiration and a burning desire to be a hero. This Izuku, this version of him, was something else entirely, something All Might couldn't quite understand. The test continued, the students around them slowly returning to their exercises, but All Might's mind remained stuck on that brief, terrifying moment. He could still feel the remnants of that intent lingering in the air, a chilling reminder that something was very wrong. As Izuku walked back to rejoin the group, his movements once again fluid and controlled, All Might couldn't shake the feeling that the boy standing before him was a stranger. The bright, happy successor he had known seemed to have been replaced by someone darker, someone who was far too comfortable with the idea of taking a life. "My boy, my bright boy, what happened to you?" Aizawa Shouta entered the teacher's lounge, his expression as unreadable as ever. But inside, he was troubled. He'd been watching Izuku Midoriya closely, and the more he observed, the more concerned he became. Namiri was already there, along with Snipe. They both looked up as Aizawa sat down, sensing the weight of the conversation that was about to unfold. "We need to talk about Midoriya," Aizawa began, his voice low. "Something's off. No kid that I've ever seen has that sort of edge to them, that killing intent. I've noticed it too. From the moment he walked into my class, for a brief second, he looked at me as if he was seeing someone else, and I thought I heard him say, 'Beach Sensei.' Then immediately apologized, saying, 'You reminded me of someone, my mistake.' It wasn't anger, it was reflexive, like he was used to saying that to someone who looked like me." Snipe leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing beneath his hat. "I saw it too. You know, the kid asked me to certify his knife handling. I've never seen someone so calmly handle knives, at least, not at that age. And then the kid asked me if he could get certified for firearm use. Said it was something he needed to know. And the way he talked about it, like it was no big deal, like he was already comfortable with the idea of using a gun. That's not normal, especially not for first-year heroics students." Aizawa's gaze darkened. "He's too comfortable with a lot of things that he shouldn't be. What are we going to do?" He sighed. "Right now? There's not much we can do. He isn't harming himself or others. But we can investigate. My next stop is Nedzu. He probably already knows, considering he takes pleasure in watching my quirk assessment tests every year, but still, he wasn't there. He didn't feel the same thing I felt. He didn't feel that killing intent." Namiri looked troubled. "Should a student with killing intent be allowed to stay? What about the other kids?" "As I said, the kid hasn't done anything yet. The most we can do is keep a close eye on things and keep a close eye on the kid. I hate to say it, but it might help the kids to be near someone like that. To see that heroics isn't all fun and games. And risk the student's safety? Would you rather he be here, where we can investigate, where we can keep an eye on him, where we can offer help? Or would you rather he be out there doing God knows what? No, as uncomfortable as it's going to make us all, he stays. I am coming through the door like a hero." Izuku looked up, noticing All Might, and a part of him smiled. He was glad his mentor was enjoying himself and that he'd get to learn from him again after so long. He grabs his hero costume case and gasps. He had drawn it, his assassin's uniform from 3E, the only additions being the crescent moon over his heart, and the 3E sticked onto both sleeves. While the material could not, would never be the same. He feels ever so much better as he pulls it on, ignoring the other students in the locker room who have stilled, ignoring the "what the f" dash from Katsuki as he exposes the scars on his arms from learning to use his knives. He came to attention, one of the first out, noticing the way All Might frowned upon seeing his uniform. All Might wasn't the one he wanted to impress right now, though it would be nice to do so. No, right now all he was focused on was how Koro Sensei would have been so proud of him, achieving his dream. The first hiccup was as he turned to look at his other classmates, ones he hadn't been paying too much attention to, unless it was either Katsuki or they looked like they were going to try an assassination attempt. Those were always entertaining to either help in or watch. No, there were no more assassination attempts. This was a hero school. He had to remember that. The second hiccup happened as he watched Shoji stretch out his 6 arms in preparation, and a pang of familiarity tugged at him. The way Shoji's arms moved, the fluidity and control, reminded Izuku too much of someone else, someone whose comforting presence had once been a beacon in a much darker world. Koro Sensei, with his gentle humor and unyielding support, had been more than a teacher, he had been a friend, a protector. Izuku's fingers twitched with the urge to ask Shoji to ruffle his hair, just like Koro Sensei used to with his tentacles. But he shoved the thought down, burying it under a mask of indifference. Hero school, he reminded himself again, you're back home and will never see Koro Sensei again. Today we're doing battle trials. The scenario is as follows: a 2-man villain team has possession of a bomb, and you as a 2-man hero team have been called as the first responders. The scenario ends when either the hero team is captured with the binding tape I'll give you all, or when the hero team captures either both villains or captures the bomb. Any questions? Isn't this a little advanced? Are we being graded? Will we be expelled if we don't do well? Isn't my cape trace magnifique? Whoa, slow down everyone. This is not a graded exercise. Just a test of your abilities. How will teams be selected? Randomly. How does that make sense? In the field as a hero, you don't always get the luxury of deciding who you get to partner with, and a lot of the time, you only have a moment's notice that such a team-up will be happening. That's what I'm trying to simulate. He rolled his eyes. All Might is still his favorite hero, but the man is really out of his depth as a teacher. Even Beach Sensei had been better, and she was an assassin with no training as a teacher. And of course, because why not, he's assigned the role of villain with Yaoyorozu as his villain partner, with Kirishima and Ida as the hero team. So what's our plan, she asks. He winces, remembering Irina Sensei's voice, her playful smirk, and her sultry tones. He was unerringly aware of what this role might require. I'm going to be the distraction for the heroes. Your quirk is the best for surprising the heroes that will be coming for us. Set up a few traps by the door, the window there, and that wall. He motions to the wall closest to the bomb. All 3 locations are where he'd expect heroes or assassins for that matter to come in. However, he doubted that any of the hero candidates who were his new classmates would think of either using the window or blowing up the wall to get to the bomb. You know, he thinks he can bet which entrance they'll be using. The moment came faster than he had anticipated. Ida was the first to burst into the room, his engines roaring as he dashed toward the bomb, going so fast he didn't trigger any of the defensive measures Yaoyorozu put up. Kirishima wasn't too far behind, already hardened. A perfect quirk for defense. Good thing Beach Sensei showed me a good way to get around a defense. Flashback. Beach Sensei leaned casually against the desk, her long legs crossed and a coy smile playing on her lips. He had been sitting opposite her, trying to keep his gaze from wandering as she scrutinized him with those sharp, mischievous eyes. He wondered for a brief moment why he'd agreed to talk with her after class, why she had singled him out after her unsuccessful attempt at assassinating Koro Sensei with her honeypot trap. You know, Midoriya, you've got something special, she had said, her voice laced with honeyed tones that made him feel like he was in over his head. And Miss Beach, what do you mean, he had stammered, cheeks flushing with embarrassment. She had chuckled, the sound rich and velvety. You're cute enough to pull it off. The whole innocent, wide-eyed thing. It's a weapon if you know how to use it. She had leaned closer, her perfume intoxicating. Stockton, Midoriya. Sometimes, being underestimated is your greatest strength. You should let me show you how to use it to your advantage. Izuku had felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. I'm not sure if that's. Trust me, she had interrupted, her voice dropping to a whisper. In the right hands, even a smile can be deadly. Present. His mind went blank for a second, the weight of his memories crashing over him. He never thought he'd use Beach Sensei's techniques, but training took over. The mission always came first. He stepped forward, a smile that felt foreign tugging at his lips as he faced Kirishima. Hey, Kirishima, he said, his tone light, almost playful. Kirishima paused, taken aback by the sudden change in Izuku's demeanor. Midoriya? What's up, man? Izuku let out a soft, almost shy laugh, the kind Irina had taught him to perfect. He shifted his stance, subtly drawing Kirishima's gaze downward, away from his eyes, just as she had shown him. You know, Izuku continued, his voice dipping into a lower register, I've always admired strong men. It's really impressive. He took a step closer, his movement slow, deliberate, as if every word he spoke was a secret meant just for Kirishima. Kirishima blinked, clearly confused by the sudden shift in the conversation. Thanks, Midoriya, but... Before he could react, Izuku was in front of him, too close, his hand lightly brushing Kirishima's arm. The gesture was innocent enough, but the underlying intention was clear: to distract, to disarm. Wouldn't it be easier if you just gave up? Izuku whispered, his voice barely above a breath. You don't want to hurt me, do you? For a moment, Kirishima's hardened resolve faltered, his eyes flicking down to where Izuku's fingers lingered on his arm. It was just a moment, just a brief hesitation, but it was enough. Izuku saw the opening and moved in, throwing his weight against Kirishima in a way that was less about force and more about positioning. He was using every trick Irina had taught him, playing on confusion, on hesitation, turning Kirishima's strength against him. Ida, meanwhile, was still caught in Momo's defensive maneuver, unable to assist. The heroes were cornered, their plans disrupted by a tactic they had never expected from a hero candidate. But that wasn't all that he was. He couldn't just forget the things that he had learned, the things he had been so unexpectedly good at. Kirishima stumbled back, bewildered and off balance. Izuku's mind was already calculating the next move. The battle ended quickly after that. Momo took advantage of Kirishima's distraction to secure Ida, and before Kirishima could shake off his bewilderment, he flipped the boy over his shoulder, kneeing him in the back to keep him on the floor. He wrapped the capture tape around the boy's arms, satisfied as he heard. Villain team wins. All Might had an unreadable expression on his face as Izuku came out. Now class, who was the MVP of that match? Izuku. He was the one who made the plan for the hero's entryway. He was the one who distracted the hero who had the best defense against us. Yaoyorozu blushes, even if it was unconventional, it worked. Villains aren't always one-dimensional, just like heroes. I hope there are no hard feelings, Kirishima. Nah man, that was pretty manly, taking me out so quickly like that. Did you see that beach, sensei? You helped me be a better hero. I hope you're proud, he thought to himself. Coming to school that morning, he can see a crowd forming. He wants to avoid them, especially once he gets closer and he realizes that it's the media. He hates the media. They do nothing but twist what a person says, making them look like idiots or like killers. One woman shoves a microphone in his face, and he scowls. Do you like having All Might as a teacher? Koro, he stops himself from finishing the sentence. He's not defending Koro Sensei from the media that had swarmed his class at the mountainside, had accused them all of being brainwashed. All Might has some great advice to give us about how to be a good hero, and it doesn't include shoving yourself into a child's personal space to get a story. Now step back. Well, he's not very friendly for a hero candidate, is he? He hears her ask her cameraman, and he rolls his eyes. If he was feeling unfriendly, he would have threatened them with his anti-sensei knife to get them to back off. Flashback. His class is being swarmed by reporters. Poor Nagisa, who hated the attention, seemed to be their main target as they shoved their mics into his face. Did you ever consider leaving the class? Is it true your teacher is a monster? Is it true that he brainwashed all of you? Koro Sensei is not a monster. He remembered shouting. They are brainwashed, poor kids. He hated them then, that crowd of morons chasing the next big story and making everything they tried to tell as the truth fit a narrative. Present. He was very glad as he passed the gates that Aizawa Sensei and Mike Sensei were both standing there, because their presence prevented the media from following past the gates, and he even got to see with pleasure as a thick, steel door slammed down after Aizawa told them off for trespassing and harassing the hero students. Karasuma had tried, in his way, to support them, but Aizawa had threatened the media for them. Izuku was impressed. During class, Aizawa announced they needed a class president. Izuku, still lost in thought, was mechanically writing names on the slip of paper after Ida gave them the idea of voting for a class president. As he looked down, he realized with a start that he had written Nagisa instead of a classmate's name. He quickly scratched it out, writing Ida instead. The moment didn't go unnoticed. Midoriya, Ida said, peering over at his slip. Who's Nagisa? Izuku flushed, feeling the eyes of the class on him. Sorry. That was a mistake, he stammered, trying to laugh it off. Just a name from an old story I was thinking about. Got mixed up. His classmates chuckled and shrugged it off, but Izuku couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Nagisa's name had slipped out of habit, a reminder of a past life that didn't quite fit with the one he was trying to build here. Ida was voted in as class president, and Yaoyorozu as vice president. It seemed to make Ida very happy. It also turned out to be a very good choice when during lunch a loud level 3 breach alarm was announced. And Izuku was almost squished by hero students who should know better, panicking and pushing for the exit. Though Ida was going to be stuck with the amusing nickname Exit Sign Ida for a while, he was finally starting to feel a little like he belonged in hero school as much as he had in assassin school. A lot of people thought that Nezu had become a principal to pay back the humans for the ones that had experimented on him. While he did enjoy manipulating humans, did enjoy watching them dancing to his tune, it wasn't the only reason he had become a principal. He loved teaching the new generation, guiding them to be better heroes, to be better people, so that if the new heroes ever came across another instance of someone using the greater good as an excuse to be horrible to someone they figured didn't have the right to exist, that they would think of him, think of his teaching, and they would help. Right now, he was faced with the intriguing puzzle that was Midoriya Izuku. He'd been fascinated when he'd watched the boy's entrance practical, shivering as he realized that there was something monstrous in the small body. But he had allowed the child to come to his institution because he was certain that whatever had happened to create such a monster, it was better to be on his good side than having to worry about the boy turning the power of one for all and his exceptional skills against them. Aizawa had turned in his report from the fascinating confrontation between Izuku and Bakugo Katsuki, making mention of the boy's killing intent. Snipe and Namuri had turned in their reports about the oddities they had mentioned. Now on one screen, he was watching Izuku confronting the media saying something about Koro before cutting himself off, and on the other screen the video showed, on repeat, Izuku's unconventional tactics for the battle trials. Each was another piece of the puzzle, which was Midoriya Izuku. Did you notice any strange behavior while you were training with him, Toshinori? No, he just seemed like an eager fanboy. He worked so hard without complaint the whole time I was training him. So something had to have happened either before you trained with him, or after you gave him your quirk. The former seems more likely than the latter, but neither can be ruled out. I just don't understand how he went from the fanboy to that thing. Watch it, Toshinori. He growled. He hated anyone being called a thing, especially one of his students. No matter what, Midoriya Izuku is still your successor and a student of my school. But he was acting like a villain. Toshinori, I mean this most kindly, but you are an idiot. He watches as Toshinori coughs, and he hands him a handkerchief. Midoriya Izuku is showing signs of being trained for something dark, but he hasn't done anything villainous yet. Sure, he scared a classmate, and probably made poor Kirishima question his sexuality, but he hasn't done anything to seriously harm anyone. I intend to find out who has been messing around with one of my students, and in the meantime, we can guide him, and keep him on the path to heroics. If he ends up being a problem, well, what better place to deal with that than a school full of heroes? Not too long after the level 3 breach, Aizawa announced they were going on a field trip. For a moment, he froze, remembering how wrong another field trip had gone. Well, he was going to make sure that this trip went better. He remembered Koro Sensei's guide and made a mental checklist for everything he'd have to ensure they had. Sensei. Yes, Midoriya? I was wondering if we've prepared adequately for this field trip. Izuku's expression remained unreadable as he continued. How many first aid kits do we have? Are they fully stocked? Do we have backup supplies? Standard kits are available for each rescue zone. It's a training exercise, not a battlefield. How often are they stocked? Checked? Are there AEDs nearby? A hospital? What is their response time? All standard kits are stocked and checked regularly, and AEDs are within regulation distance from the kits. As for the hospital, I have no idea. What about the vehicles we will be taking? Have they been checked for potential threats such as explosives and tampering? He doesn't notice the class has gone silent, just staring as he continues with his checklist. All vehicles undergo rigorous checks. Izuku pressed on, still calm but relentless. What's the route we're taking to the USJ? Do we have a map? Has anyone reviewed it for possible ambush points? And how many heroes will be accompanying us? Aizawa frowned, his patience thinning. Myself, 13, and All Might will be present. That's more than sufficient for a controlled environment like the USJ. Izuku didn't flinch. If something unexpected happens, are there contingency plans in place? At least 2 more heroes should be on standby in case of emergencies, or in case the initial response team is incapacitated. What the F, Deku, it's a field trip, not a war zone. Aizawa stared at Izuku, his expression unreadable behind his scarf. As Bakugo so eloquently put it, Midoriya, this is a training exercise designed to simulate rescue scenarios. We're not expecting anything dangerous. Why do you think we need such precautions? Preparation is key to any but, he cuts himself off, hero, not assassin, hero mission sir. Izuku looked down at his notes, his pen tapping rhythmically against the paper. He could feel the eyes of his classmates on him, but he didn't care. In my experience, it's better to be overprepared than underprepared, he said simply. Assumptions can be fatal. Have we taken precautions with the food and water? Has anyone ensured they haven't been tampered with? Aizawa sighed, rubbing his temples. Midoriya, I appreciate your concerns, but this isn't a covert mission. It's a controlled environment for hero training. While your caution is admirable, you're taking this too far. Izuku met his teacher's gaze, his expression unyielding. With all due respect, sensei. My concern is that you're not taking it far enough. Right, I'll bring up your concerns with Nedzu. Will that suffice? Izuku frowned. It wasn't what he wanted Aizawa to do. Karasuma would have agreed. Would have suggested all the ways he hadn't thought of that an assassin could get to this group of hero hopefuls who were all so soft. Karasuma wouldn't think twice about asking Koro Sensei to ensure they had everything in his guide checked. Even Beach Sensei would never get on his case like this about ensuring they had everything. But then, Karasuma and Beach Sensei had been on that awful field trip. Flashback. What did Koro Sensei's guide say about kidnapping again? Izuku asked Kid and Yukio. He'd been taken along with them, all because they'd been more focused on their plot to assassinate Koro Sensei while his guard was down. No one answered him. But then again, only he and Nagisa had read that huge guide Koro Sensei had written. He knew the answer, of course. Single kidnapping depended on the kidnapper. Stay calm, and try to empathize with get empathy from the kidnapper. Multiple people being kidnapped was a little more of an issue. He knew the government didn't care about them beyond their mission to assassinate Koro Sensei. He knew that no one would pay money to have them back. But they had an advantage. They had Koro Sensei. Koro Sensei may be their target, but he was also the best teacher Izuku ever had, and he cared about them. Or at least, Izuku thought he did. Present. I guess that will have to do. That didn't stop him from quickly checking his backpack before they left, or double-checking that he had all of his knives stored neatly about his costume, and to top everything off, he had gotten permission finally from Snipe to have a gun on him. It was strapped near his hip, with extra rounds placed in his storage belt. Heroes, even underground ones it seemed, were too confident in their abilities to ensure the students' safety. Well, he'd make sure they all came back safe, even if it killed him. He ignored the concerned looks shot his way when he bent down, pretending to tie his shoes, checking under the bus, and then quickly getting to his seat. You know Karo, he heard Azui say, I always say what's on my mind. Are you in trouble, Midoriya? I hope not, he said honestly, but experience has taught me that it's better to be safe than sorry, especially on field trips with students that attract too much attention. There's a bit of silence after that, although for some reason he still feels twitchy. When they finally arrived, he kept an ear on what 13 was saying as well as scouting for the locations that his friends would hide in. No, he didn't have to search the trees for the hidden snipers or for spots to hide to be the sniper. He noticed the ripple in the air first. It was purple, he thinks, and for a split second before something stepped through he almost thought he'd be hearing Koro Sensei popping up to test their reflexes. In the next second, a man stepped through with a whole crowd of villains. Everyone stay calm. 13, protect the students. Sensei, you are not a good match, allow someone to come with you, please. No hero is a one-trick pony Midoriya, now follow my orders. No assassin has only one blade, he hears and nods. Orders are orders. But his classmates haven't learned that lesson yet, as he sees Bakugo and Kirishima attack the mist villain who sighs and opens portals. Then he finds himself falling, the water rushes up to meet him and he's glad that Koro Sensei built the pool for them so he could learn to swim. Even so, Koro Sensei's pool hadn't had a shark man coming up to try to bite him in half. He struck out with his foot, glad he'd asked for a steel toe as it connected with the shark man's nose. He felt something wrap around him and is glad when it turned out to be Azui's tongue. She dragged him up to the boat. What are we supposed to do? Mineta whines, and he can't help scowling at the short boy. He could understand a little bit about panicking, hell even he had done it the first time they'd been attacked. But you learned quickly to push past the panic. I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to be heroes. His plan goes off without a hitch besides the minor pain he feels in his broken finger. He can push past that, especially as he watches Aizawa. Aizawa has most of the villains down already but is tiring. He can see it, and if he can see it, then the villains can too. I told you so, he whispers, but he takes no pleasure in being right. It isn't the time for that. Because standing next to the villain with the hands on his face, the one who just disintegrated Aizawa's arm is another villain. It is standing still, just waiting for orders, but that's not what catches his attention. It reminds him of the Reaper. How can the Reaper be here? He shakes his head, dismissing the memories, and pulls a knife, throwing it at the villain with the hands. That wasn't a very heroic thing to do. He ignores the villain as he goes for the Reaper. It is the bigger threat. He has to eliminate it. Breathing deeply, he pulls his anti-sensei knife and runs under the Reaper's legs. It's just standing there, but he knows he only has seconds. He plunges a second normal knife into the thing's back, hauling himself up by grabbing at the handle and flinging himself upon its shoulders. He screams as he plunges his anti-sensei knife into the thing's brain. Plunges it again and again. Blood is coating his hands, but he cannot falter, not yet. Not until the threat is neutralized. He severed the brainstem, unheeding to the large boom as they both hit the ground. He doesn't hear the villains retreating. He doesn't hear Aizawa Sensei calling his name. He doesn't even feel it when they try to pull him away from the thing, even as he tries to get back to it. Please, he tries, knowing he sounds broken. He doesn't care, he has to neutralize the threat. He has to. He's still struggling when he smells something, and it all goes black. Nedzu might be an animal, he likes pestering his underlings and enjoys a little chaos now and then, but he does care for the people under his care. He had let the Midoriya Izuku puzzle be because the boy hadn't done anything wrong and because he hadn't had a puzzle that he enjoyed in so very long. But he recognized after he came upon the scene of one of his students, straining against his teacher's capture weapon, trying desperately to get at the Nomo long after it was clear the creature was dead, his eyes crazed, screaming. Please, so desperately, that he might have made the wrong choice. So, he paced repeatedly, his small paws making soft taps against the floor as he contemplated their next move. How was he supposed to help his student when he didn't even know what was wrong? He only stopped pacing once the other teachers were all gathered in the break room. We cannot let this go on. Present Mike, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up, his voice strained. The kid was like a wild thing out there. It kinda terrified me that a kid could just go for the last option a hero should ever take first, and without any remorse or hesitation, and then the way he kept trying to go after the Nomu after it was down. It terrifies me, and I didn't even see the whole thing happen. I can't imagine what his classmates are thinking right now, having watched one of their classmates take a life. This isn't something they are supposed to learn in school, and certainly not in their first week. Not that it's any better when you're a pro hero, of course, but at least then, it's an adult who knows the consequences, who can judge when it's right to make such a choice, and that doesn't even cover the massive amount of therapy the kid is going to need. Making that choice, it changes you. Aizawa, arms crossed and eyes narrowed, nodded in agreement. I can relate. As an underground hero, you get to see the worst of people, and in my career, I've had to make that choice, but even I was affected by it. It took Yamada and Namuri literally dragging me to therapy to see that I was punishing myself. There is a reason I don't take any of those missions anymore. I have people who care about me, and I learned that while what I did was necessary, it didn't make me evil or wrong. Midoriya. Whoever trained him has trained him so that he thinks of going for the kill first, and that. Well, it doesn't speak kindly of anything he experienced. Kayama leaned forward, concern evident in her usually playful demeanor. I think I speak for us all when I say that I understand sometimes the lethal option is one we have to take as heroes, the fact that a kid had to do it and that he did it without flinching. She winced. I just don't think I could feel safe around the kid, and I'm not sure that his other classmates could either. Not that I want him gone or anything, I like the kid, but that kind of unflinching lethality in a kid, it isn't right. All Might, who had been silent until now, finally spoke, his voice low and heavy. You all might not be aware, because I don't talk about my time in America very often, but I've seen soldiers with less intensity in their eyes. Whatever he's been through, it's left scars deeper than any physical wound. Nedzu sighed. Do we all agree then, that something has to be done? Yes, the voice was unanimous for once. Nedzu's eyes gleamed with a calculated light. Then I propose a solution. There is a quirk we can use. It's called Trust Sight. It allows the person the quirk is used upon to see the people in the room with them as someone they trust implicitly. The effect is temporary, but it could give us insight into Midoriya's psyche without him feeling threatened. I think the most important thing is to find out who exactly trained Midoriya, and once we know the who and the why we can work on deprogramming. Aizawa frowned. And what happens when the effect wears off? It could damage any trust he has in us. Nedzu nodded, acknowledging the concern. That's why we need to be careful about who we choose to be the ones he interacts with. We need people he already has a level of trust in, or at least familiarity. Midnight's brow furrowed as she processed the information. So, who do you have in mind? Nedzu turned his gaze to Aizawa. You, Aizawa, will be one of them. Your ability to nullify quirks will ensure that, if something goes wrong, we can bring it back under control. Aizawa's frown deepened. And the other? Yukayama. She blinked in surprise. Me? But why? You reported yourself that Midoriya associated you, or rather your appearance with someone from his past. A trainer perhaps? If you can tap into that connection, we might be able to reach him. He sees that Kayama looks vaguely ill. Okay, no big deal, just gotta pretend to be the person who may or may not be the reason one of our students is a killer. I understand your reluctance, Kayama, but we need to know if we are to help him. Aizawa gritted his teeth. I don't like it either, the idea that I'll have to listen to one of our students telling us about whatever hell training he's been through. Netsu's voice softened, understanding the emotional weight of what he was asking. I know this is difficult, for the both of you. But if we don't address this now, Midoriya will continue down a path that could destroy him or worse, lead to others being harmed. We have a responsibility to him to guide him back to a place where he can become the hero he's meant to be. And when we find who it was that did this to one of my students, there will be no place on earth that they can hide. Izuku's eyes fluttered open, the familiar sterile scent of a hospital room was filling his senses. For a moment, he blinked in confusion, his mind still foggy. The last thing he remembered was... What was it? USJ? The attack? His thoughts swirled, chaotic and disjointed. He must have hit his head at some point because everything is just so muddled. As his vision cleared, he noticed a familiar figure sitting in the chair next to his bed. Beach Sensei? He asked, confused, and looking around, standing against the wall, he could see Karasuma-sense. His heart skipped a beat. This wasn't right, but then again, he didn't know anything about his original quirk, the one that had sent him to that strange world. Hey Midoriya, how are you feeling? Beach Sensei asked, but he couldn't remember her ever sounding so concerned. When she was concerned she always injected a certain anger in her tone that was absent. Something must have gone extremely wrong if she was being soft. He blinked as he looked between Beach Sensei and Karasuma Sensei. Did I accomplish the mission, Karasuma Sensei? Is the Reaper gone? For a moment, Karasuma looks angry, but why was he angry? Midoriya, Karasuma spoke, why don't you tell me? What were the parameters of the mission? The same mission as always, Karasuma Sensei. To assassinate Koro Sensei. But, something went wrong. A Reaper was there, and Koro Sensei wasn't. Why wasn't Koro Sensei there? He was there the last time I had to face a Reaper with Nagisa. He had never seen Karasuma's expression look so very, very angry before, and he wondered what had he done wrong. Karasuma Sensei, are you feeling all right? Did I tell you that was your mission? Karasuma asks, his tone strangled. Karasuma Sensei, have you been drinking? You gave that mission to all of us in Class 3E, don't you remember? Or is this training for interrogation? If so, you should let the rest of the class know. I don't think they'll react positively to Class Dad being so weird. Beach Sensei looks like she's going to cry and now he's feeling really weird. Am I cleared for visitors, Karasuma Sensei? I'd like to hear from Koro Sensei how he thought I did on this assassination attempt. He's so confused when Beach Sensei stands with a cry. I can't do this. Karasuma Sensei? Did I say something wrong? Irina Sensei has never cried before. Midoriya, Karasuma begins, his voice cracking with emotion. Remind me. How did I train you? Where? When? He frowned. Karasuma Sensei, what is this about? Please. And that's when the illusion shatters. Karasuma would never. Miss Beach would never. He looks on in horror as he realizes it's Aizawa in the chair, not Karasuma. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut, and he gasped, his breath hitching in his throat. He looked at the man sitting in the chair, no longer seeing the stern yet supportive face of his old mentor. Instead, it was Aizawa, his hair disheveled and his expression filled with a mixture of concern and sorrow. No. Izuku whispered, his voice barely audible. No, this isn't right. You're not. Karasuma Sensei isn't here. Koro Sensei isn't here. None of them are here. Midoriya, we're all pro-heroes. We'll understand if you were acting on someone else's orders. But I need to know. Whoever this Karasuma Sensei was, what he did wasn't right. He shouldn't have trained you to be what? An assassin? Karasuma Sensei didn't have a choice. The Department of Defense made him. But he ensured that I had a safe place to stay. He ensured that I had a teacher to support me for the first time in my life. He trained all of us losers in 3E to be better, to do better. You don't get to say anything bad about him. Aizawa's expression softened, but his gaze remained steady. I can see that whoever he was you feel a sense of loyalty towards him, and you are right, I shouldn't judge him. But you have to realize that as a hero, what it sounds like is that someone took a bunch of impressionable kids and taught them that they had no value beyond the fact that they are impressionable kids. You have to see that it was wrong, what they trained you to do is wrong. Izuku's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his knuckles turning white. You don't understand, he insisted, his voice rising. You weren't there. You don't know what it was like. Koro Sensei was going to destroy the world, and we were the only ones who could stop him. Karasuma Sensei made sure we had what we needed: training, support, everything to survive. He gave us a chance. You're right, Aizawa finally said, his voice still calm but carrying a note of sadness. I wasn't there. I don't know what you went through. But what I do know is that no child should have to face those kinds of choices. You should have been allowed to be a student, to learn, to grow, not to become an assassin. But I'm good at it. Better than I am at using that stupid, bone-breaking quirk. Why shouldn't I use what I know if it makes me a better hero? Aizawa looked stricken. Because it does things to you. Killing people. I know. Please Midoriya, let us help you. Let me help you. Okay, he said, defeated. Izuku sat across from Nezu, the small rodent-like principal perched on a chair that seemed much too big for him. The atmosphere was heavy, laden with tension and an unspoken understanding that something irreversible had happened. Izuku's hands were clasped tightly together, knuckles white, as if holding on would somehow keep his reality from slipping away. Izuku, Nezu began, his voice uncharacteristically soft, yet edged with urgency. I want to talk about what happened at the USJ, but more importantly, I need to understand you. I think we all do. What you showed us today. Well, it's clear you're carrying something far heavier than we ever imagined. Izuku looked away, his heart pounding. He didn't know where to begin. Could he even explain it? The memories of that world, of those people, felt so distant, yet so vivid. The weight of his actions pressed on his chest. I hate that I had to hurt you to bring the truth forward, but Izuku, all of you are my precious students. Izuku trembled as he remembered Koro Sensei saying something far too similar as he vanished. I've killed 2 people. That monster at the USJ and Koro Sensei. I only regret Koro Sensei's death. He didn't want to die, and we tried so hard to get the information to keep him alive. Koro Sensei he didn't deserve to be assassinated, and it had to be done. Nezu's ears twitched, his small frame still as a statue, yet his eyes never left Izuku. Tell me about this Koro Sensei. Izuku's mind spiraled back, to that fateful moment, that final moment. When it had been the class he'd come to love, when it had come down to him and Nagisa. Nagisa, who'd never hesitated before, had trembled, his knife unsteady as the rest of the class held Koro Sensei down. Flashback. It was a night none of them would forget. Racing up the mountain to their Koro Sensei, to get to him before the weapon could. Koro Sensei was their target, their assassination to complete, but he was more than that. He was the guiding force behind their drive to be better. To do better. To prove that they weren't nothing or nobodies. Izuku stood beside Nagisa, his heart hammering in his chest as Koro Sensei smiled at them, that same gentle, unwavering smile he had seen 1,000 times before. But tonight, it was different. Tonight, it was their job to end him. Koro Sensei's voice was calm, almost soothing. You've done well, all of you. Better than I could have ever hoped for. Now please let us have one last roll call. Each student's voice trembled as their name was called, and something in Izuku knew that this was the end for him. Whether he found his way back to his work or not didn't matter anymore, hadn't mattered in a while if he was being honest. He'd found more support, more love, more everything he always wished he could have in this world. If it took assassinating Koro Sensei to stay, well, it killed him. A little inside, but he needed to stay, and he knew from watching Nagisa that Nagisa could do it quickly, could do it the proper way so Koro Sensei wouldn't suffer. His classmates all took a single tentacle in their hands, keeping Koro Sensei from moving, even though they all knew he wouldn't fight. It was a comforting measure, like holding Koro Sensei's hand. Like telling Koro Sensei, sorry, but that they were there for him. That they would do this for him the way he wanted them to. Nagisa's hand shook as he stood over Koro Sensei as the last name was called. I can't. He sobbed, and in that moment Izuku knew he'd have to help. Koro Sensei, Izuku whispered, his voice breaking, you could still escape. We'd all let you. I do, Koro Sensei interrupted gently, his tentacles still and his gaze soft. This is the only way. I've taught you everything I can. Now it's time for you to grow beyond me. Izuku sobbed as he wrapped his hand around Nagisa's shaking one, and they both plunged the anti-sensei knife into Koro Sensei's heart. At that moment, time seemed to freeze. Koro Sensei let out a soft, almost content sigh. Thank you. Then, with a flicker of light, he began to fade. His form, once so vibrant and full of life, began to dissipate like smoke in the wind. And in that moment, Izuku felt something snap inside him, and he knew his original quirk, the one that brought him to his class, and his family was activating again. No. No, I don't want to go. Izuku screamed, his body shaking uncontrollably. He felt his form flicker like he was being pulled in two different directions. Nagisa's eyes widened in shock, and the rest of Class 3E surged forward, their hands reaching for Izuku as if they could hold him there, keep him from slipping away. But it was no use. He could feel himself fading. Izuku! Nagisa shouted, his hand brushing against Izuku's arm, but it passed through like smoke. I don't want to go. Izuku cried again, his voice breaking as the world around him collapsed, pulling him back to the life he had left behind. He reached out, desperate to hold on to the only family he had ever known, but it was too late. As Koro Sensei's form disappeared entirely, so did Izuku. The world of Class 3E vanished, leaving nothing but an empty void. And in the darkness, Izuku screamed, please, please. Present. The flashback ended as quickly as it had come, and Izuku was once again sitting across from Nezu, his heart racing, his breath uneven. Tears had welled up in his eyes, but he quickly wiped them away with his sleeve. Koro Sensei was everything to us. Do you know what the E stands for in 3E? He picked at the logo on his sleeve. No, though I have my guesses. It stands for N class. We were all tossed there because we either didn't have the grades, or were delinquents, or in my case, were tossed there because the principal didn't like me, which was no real surprise. No teacher or principal has ever liked stupid, useless, worthless Deku. He watched Nezu's catch himself in a half growl as if he hated the idea that a teacher or principal could be like that. Koro Sensei was the first to see we had worth. He taught us that we shouldn't let the fact that everyone thought we were worthless stop us from trying. He taught us teamwork, and how to escape a kidnapping. He taught us that our lives were worth living even if we had to do this monstrous thing. What about what you did to that creature at the USJ? Or how you've threatened your classmates? How can I be sure that you won't turn on us? That creature, he spat, was a reaper. Don't know how one is in this world, don't care. All you need to know is that they aren't human. That's why my anti-sensei knife worked so well on it. The reapers don't have feelings. They don't care about anything but killing. While I may be an assassin, I can decide not to follow orders. Reapers can't. They are mindless beasts. It was a kindness to take it out before it could take out those soft classmates of mine. They couldn't handle what needed to be done. I can. So I did. Well then, I cannot expel you, not for saving your classmates from a threat like that. But I also have to take their well-being into mind. They aren't assassins like you, Izuku. I'd like for you to start seeing our counselor Hounddog to talk about your training. Can I trust that you'll try everything else before going for the kill next time? If my classmates are in similar danger, then I won't hesitate to end the threat. But yes, where allowed I will attempt to de-escalate first. Good, good, now for the sports festival, I think it would be better for you not to participate. I just said I wouldn't kill if I didn't need to. Yes, and I trust that you will keep to that promise or I will put you into Tartarus myself, All Might's successor or not. But you have to see that because your classmates don't have the same training as you have had, and have never had to confront the idea of the lethal option, they may not feel safe around you. Izuku clenched his fists. He wasn't ashamed of his skills or his training, but he understood. They saw him differently now. They would never understand what it took to make the choices he'd had to make. But that didn't mean he was broken. He didn't regret what he'd learned. Koro Sensei had shown him he could be a hero, and he'd do it with or without their approval. I understand, he muttered. But this doesn't mean I'll stop being who I am. Nezu's eyes flickered with something resembling approval. Of course not. I wouldn't ask you to. Nezu's eyes lingered on the shattered remains of his teacup, porcelain shards glittering in the light as he recalled Izuku's words. The boy's calm acceptance of his lethal skills sent a chill through him, stirring memories of his past, the experiments, the cold indifference of the scientists who saw him as little more than a tool. It wasn't the killing that had startled him, it was the way Izuku had justified it. How he'd only regretted one death, and how he'd accepted the necessity of the others. There was something deeply wrong with a child having to carry that burden, and Nezu knew he needed to act. But how could he fix what had been broken so thoroughly? Aizawa had been shaken after their questioning of Izuku. For once, the ever-composed eraser head had looked rattled, his expression tense as he muttered something about needing a break. Namiri, too, had been visibly disturbed. It was why Nezu had insisted they step back. Aizawa's instinct was to protect his students at all costs, and Namiri's to support them, but Izuku's situation required more than protection. It required healing, deep, psychological healing that went beyond what a school counselor could offer. Nezu sighed, running a paw through his fur. He couldn't send Izuku to Hounddog. The boy needed more than just counseling. He needed deprogramming. The sheer level of obedience and admiration Izuku had for the people who trained him was dangerous. This wasn't something a well-meaning counselor could unravel, it needed a specialist. He could call in a few favors, perhaps reach out to those who dealt with similar cases during his time as a hero. Izuku deserved better than to be treated as a weapon, no matter how justified his actions had seemed in his mind. Soon after his talk with Nezu had ended, he found himself being pulled aside by All Might. "Izuku, my boy, I have been a terrible mentor. I didn't notice how much you were hurting, how much you have been hurt, but whoever has convinced you that you need these lethal skills, they're wrong. You aren't a killer, my boy." "Well, you're right about one thing, All Might, I'm not a killer," he paused. "I'm an assassin, and I happen to be quite good at it. If you don't want an assassin for a successor, then I can give the power back, I don't need it." "Not with my skills." He pulls a hair from his head, handing it to a shocked All Might. "Just be sure that the next person you chose, you don't shatter their dreams before you give that power to them." He turns to leave, only to feel himself being pulled into a hug, not by All Might's strong, hero form, but by the skinny form. "My boy, I'm so sorry." He pushed the hair back. "I won't take my choice back. I have to admit that your new skills did scare me, but absolutely nothing will change my mind about you. You still have a heroic spirit, I know it. If it means that you'll let me continue to support you, then I promise that though your skills make me uncomfortable, I will endeavor to learn to let go of the image I had of you and accept you as you are." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just took the hair back and swallowed it like he had All Might's, just in case someone else got a hold of the hair. "If you'll excuse me, All Might." "Tashinori," he said, "you can call me Tashinori when I'm not in my hero form." He nodded curtly and started back down towards his class, only to see that they were all crowded in the hallway. A smirking blonde boy was standing with a tall, purple-haired boy whose eye bags could rival Aizawa's. "So this is the infamous one, eh? I don't see what's so special about you. I mean, what could be special about a class that had to be saved from villains by one of their own?" His mocking tone hit its mark, and Izuku could feel the tension among his classmates rising. Several of them shifted uncomfortably, clearly irritated but unsure how to respond. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to remain calm as he stepped forward. Before he could speak, Hitoshi Shinsu's voice cut through the air. "You should all watch yourselves. Anyone from the hero course can be expelled at any time to make room for others from different courses. Don't think you're untouchable." The threat hung in the air, heavy and real, as Shinsu's purple eyes bored into Izuku's. It wasn't personal, at least, not from Shinsu's side. But it was a reminder that the line between heroics and failure was thinner than any of them realized. Izuku met his gaze, unflinching. "I don't need to be special to do what's right." Before anything else could be said, Bakugo stepped in, his expression dark and filled with rage. "Don't act like you're some hero, Deku," he spat. "I didn't need you to rescue me. I could have handled it myself." Izuku felt the sting of Bakugo's words, but this was a familiar pain. Bakugo had always pushed him away, no matter what he did. But he wasn't going to let Bakugo's anger distract him. "I didn't save you because you needed me to," Izuku replied quietly. "I saved you because it was the right thing to do." For a moment, the two boys stood facing each other, the tension thick between them. Bakugo's fists clenched, sparks of explosions dancing at his palms, but he didn't make a move. Then he just shoved his way past the kids and stomped into the classroom. Before he could make his way in with the rest of the class, he was pulled aside again. This time by Azui. "Izuku, I always say what's on my mind, so I want to say thank you for saving my life." She was looking at the floor instead of him. "But I'm also afraid of you." "It's okay to be afraid, Azui. What I do isn't a normal thing for heroic students. I am aware of that. But I can't magically change who I am. Thank you for being honest with me, Izuku. I hope with time I can stop being so afraid. Being a hero doesn't mean not being afraid. It means being afraid and continuing on anyway. You'll be fine, Azui." Aizawa clears his throat from behind them. "Come on, get inside." When he hears the rest of the class cheering about the sports festival, he can't help feeling annoyed. He will have to sit on the sidelines and watch. It doesn't make him feel more connected with this version of his classmates, it just makes him miss his 3E even more. When he'd first been given the mission to train a bunch of kids to be assassins, he'd considered running. He knew it'd do no good, but one of the things he'd always refused was working with kids. Kids freaked him out. Mostly because he was only a kid when he'd been taken in for training to be a government agent. He knew that they hadn't had his best interests in mind, that they only saw a good asset. He knew that if he did this he'd be condemning a classroom full of children to that same fate. But then he thought about it. If he tried to run, all that would do is buy him a short reprieve, and they'd no doubt send a different agent. One who wouldn't care about the kids, not that he cared about them, he hadn't even met them yet. But the Department of Defense was full of agents who'd be happy to ruin a bunch of children by training them more than they could handle. Then, he'd met the little hellions and he'd done something stupid. He'd gotten attached. He didn't know how or when it happened. Perhaps on that first day when the kids, shaky and unsure, had all followed orders to shoot at Koro Sensei. All but the greenette, Midoriya Izuku. Perhaps it was on the day he learned that said greenette was homeless and had cried because no one is nice to someone useless like me. Whatever it was, it had taken everything in him. To remain the cold, detached, somewhat ruthless agent he presented himself as when sometimes all he wanted to do was tell these kids, his kids, that they were all good kids. That he was proud of them, that he was especially proud of the one that he thought of as a pseudo-son since the kid had come to live with him at his government-paid apartment. Izuku. Izuku, who had such a confidence issue at the beginning, not even wanting to touch the gun he pointed at Koro Sensei. Izuku, who he noticed picked up the training scarily fast. Izuku, who melts at the slightest hint of affection. Izuku, who panics and tells him that he has a power, not one like Koro Sensei but a power that almost broke his arm to take down Takoka. Then his kids had done the impossible. They'd gone up that mountainside, had finished their mission before he could get there to tell the government that his kids had done it, and they deserved the money they'd been promised. Only, when he gets there all his kids are sobbing messes and Nagisa is looking like he's seen a ghost. He just vanished, sensei. Izuku. He had to help me finish the assassination and he just vanished. He doesn't understand. Dead, he could understand dead. Death meant a body, a grave, he would be devastated, he knew, but a body or a grave he could grieve. He could move on, he would move on, would have to move on for the rest of his kids. But what was he supposed to do about Izuku just vanishing like he'd never existed? His heart felt like it was being ripped in two. He'd gotten attached to all of his kids, but Izuku had been special. Izuku had been the one to break past the walls he put up, that he had to put up to be an effective agent. What was he supposed to do? His knees almost give out on him, but he knows he has to stay strong for his other kids. They are all going to need him. Karasuma-sensei, I've been monitoring Izuku's power since he told you about it. Ritsu's voice said from his phone, I think with enough time we can track it. If we can track it, then we can find him. Okay. He says simply, what are the facts? Izuku has a power like Koro Sensei. It somehow activated after Koro Sensei's death and he had vanished. Izuku's power had an energy Ritsu could track with time. They could find him, they would find him eventually, and then, they'd bring him home. Aizawa, sensei, I'm aware that I'm banned from competing at the sports festival, but may I ask for your assistance with my quirk training? A good assassin always has a second blade, and it would be illogical not to train a blade as powerful as that. He watches as Aizawa's face scrunched, I'm not a paid quirk counselor, Midoriya. And I'm not asking you to be one. I'm simply asking you, the teacher, to watch and intervene in case something goes wrong. I have some idea of how to use my quirk. I did manage to use it in the exam and in your quirk assessment even though it was only the second and third time I've used my quirk. All I'm asking really is for you to cancel my quirk if something goes wrong. Or would you prefer I spend time in the infirmary, sir? He puts more sarcasm into sassing Aizawa than he ever would Karasuma. But just because Aizawa reminds him of Karasuma, doesn't mean Aizawa cares about him like Karasuma did. Wish you were here instead. Dad. He doesn't mean to be but to Izuku, but every time he looks at the kid is that moment that the kid revealed that the man Izuku saw as most trustworthy, the man he apparently called class dad, had taken one look at a bunch of desperate, trusting kids and decided to turn them into assassins. He knows that heroics isn't pleasant, especially with everything that underground heroes see and do. But the idea that somewhere out there is a class full of assassins, Izuku hasn't talked about them in the past sense, so he knows they are still alive, or were, that might all have the same flippant attitude towards the attempt in ending a life. He shuddered at remembering how cheerfully Izuku had asked to see his target. He didn't know what was up with that. They may be training heroes that, if he's being honest, are child soldiers, but Nedzu would sooner die than allow any of his teachers to turn a class full of children into brainwashed assassins. Izuku is mad at him. He can tell that by the way he snarked at him for wanting Aizawa to do his job so that he could learn to use his second knife, and hadn't that burned, that this Karasuma had obviously drilled the no hero is a one-trick pony lesson into Izuku, only twisting it to be about assassination. He doesn't know how to confront this problem. So he falls back on the methods he usually used when he encounters a problem he doesn't have a fix for, he ignores it. He'll tackle the problem he does know how to fix, the kid's issues with quirk control. Midoriya, he begins, I'm sorry that I caused you to feel like you can't ask me about training your quirk. May I ask, what have you been doing? Well, on my second time using it, I tried to imagine the power making a feedback loop from where it sits to my arm and back. He winces. Rightfully, Izuku is not going to just let it go that he has only used his quirk 3 times. Normally, he'd use information like that to conclude that the student in question is lazy and expel them. He won't do that with Izuku. He wonders for a moment why, if this Karasuma had seen Izuku having a powerful quirk, that they didn't insist he train to use it more often. But, perhaps that was a kindness. The kid really seemed unable to control it. Okay, that seems to be a good start. Let's practice. Do you know how to meditate? No. Okay, what you're going to do is sit comfortably. He waits until the kid does so. Now, you should be able to feel your quirk. I can. What does it feel like? An ocean. Well, sheet, no wonder the kid was having trouble. Okay. I want you to feel that ocean, 2ch only the edge. Slowly feel how it flows through you. He watches as red lines appear all over the kid's body, green lightning arching in sparks on his skin. Good. Let's see how far you can go. Can you dip a whole foot into the ocean? He runs the kid through a few of these exercises until he ends up having to cancel the kid's quirk just as it's at waist level. So the kid can access what seems like half of his quirk's potential. That is terrifying to know. For the rest of the class, he has the kid stay in the shallows trying to keep his quirk active while he has Izuku run, trying to get him used to having his quirk constantly activated at a lower level until it becomes instinct. He may not be able to do anything about one of Izuku's problems. He may not be able to track down and beat on this Karasuma until the man regrets ever messing with one of his students, but what he can do is help Izuku see that they will be there for him. They will help him learn to be a hero. They all tried to go back to normal lives, even him. But every day Karasuma had to stare at the empty room that was his kids in the apartment felt like a stab to the gut worse than any knife. He'd never known that he was such a softie. He'd never expected to like the class of hellions. But he had. He'd done the job, but he'd gone further than that. He'd become the class dad, and now he can't stop thinking about it. About how his kids are all doing, about how Izuku is doing, about how Nagisa is doing. The government tried to shove their involvement under the rug, but he hadn't let them. He'd given testimony that it was his kids that did the assassination, under much better circumstances than what would have happened had the government gone through with their idiotic version. He'd hoped they could have a life with the money they'd earned through their hard work, diligence, and sacrifice. But his kids come back one by one complaining of the same thing. They tried to go back to normal lives. But he'd known from the start that they wouldn't be able to do that. Killing people does things to a person. Even the kids who hadn't held the final knife like Nagisa and Izuku were failing at pretending to be normal. So he used some of the money to buy themselves the old classroom and fix it up. The principal had given Karasuma a weird look, but money talks. So now they owned the land surrounding their classroom and the classroom itself in perpetuity, with guardianship of the land passing to Ritsu in perpetuity, as they were unsure if Ritsu could die as an AI. They'd quickly dismantled the old classroom, taking the desks out to the firing range for shooting practice, and he didn't have the heart to stop them, even once joining in to pretend that it was just another day, just another assassination attempt on Koro Sensei. 2 weeks passed in this way. Every day he'd go to the mountaintop where Koro Sensei and Izuku had disappeared, hoping for more clues on what had happened and why. Every day he'd feel increasingly despondent as experiment after experiment failed. I've finally got something. What? What is it? He can't help feeling excited. Ritsu's avatar shifted as data filled the screen. The reason we haven't been able to track Izuku is because Koro Sensei's energy is masking his. It took a lot of time and effort, but I've managed to separate the two signals. I've confirmed it. Izuku isn't on this earth. Karasuma's brow furrowed. What do you mean, not on this earth? Ritsu's digital eyes flickered as she processed her next explanation. There's a theory in quantum mechanics about the existence of many Earth's parallel universes, if you will. I've been analyzing the energy signatures left behind by Koro Sensei and Izuku. Koro Sensei's antimatter made things complicated, but once I filtered it out, I was able to detect that Izuku's energy is elsewhere. Not here. Not in our world. Karasuma took a deep breath, trying to wrap his head around the information. So what can we do? Right now? Not much. We need more data, more research. But I swear, Dad, we'll find a way to bring him back. Ritsu's voice was firm, determined. That word again. Dad. Karasuma's chest tightened. His kids had started calling him that not long after they'd returned to what was left of their normal lives. It hadn't been official at first, but the more they leaned on him, the more they needed him, the more the title had stuck. He had stepped in where the other parents couldn't, or wouldn't. Eventually it became true for all of his kids as their parents signed over custody one after the other. He was their father now, and that meant one thing above all else: he would protect them. Eventually, it would include all of them, even Izuku. All right, Ritsu, he said, his voice steady. Keep working on it. We'll figure this out. Ritsu's avatar nodded before disappearing from the screen, leaving the room in silence. Izuku stood at the edge of the training field, arms crossed, feeling the weight of Aizawa's gaze on him. His classmates were out there, running drills, preparing for the upcoming sports festival while he was sidelined. He knew why, of course. They couldn't trust him. Nezu had said as much. He'd been okay with the decision, he trusted his own skills, and hadn't really thought too hard about the internships. But being a hero was still his dream, and his classmates were going to learn things he would be left out of. It irritated him. Worse was watching Aizawa. Aizawa wasn't Karasuma. Izuku had thought, at first, that they were similar. Rumors had reached him about Aizawa's ruthless approach, about how he'd expelled his entire class before to protect them from failure in the hero world. That sounded like something Karasuma would have done, a tough love approach to save them from a worse fate. But the more time Izuku spent watching Aizawa, the more disappointed he became. Aizawa was soft. He let them train, let them think they were ready, but they weren't. They couldn't be. These kids were too focused on showing off their quirks, too caught up in what they thought heroics was supposed to be. They'd die out there, he thought bitterly. And worse, Aizawa wasn't doing enough to prepare them for that reality. They would die. Izuku's grip tightened on the sidearm he had stashed in his jacket pocket, a habit he'd picked up from Class 3E, a reminder of the times Karasuma allowed them to train with live rounds, teaching them the weight of consequences. These students, his so-called classmates, wouldn't last 5 minutes in the real world. And that irritated him more than he cared to admit. A slow burn of frustration built in his chest as he watched Yaoyorozu hesitate for the third time in her drill. She had one of the best quirks in the class, and yet, she froze under pressure. So easy to fluster, he thought. A single distraction, and I could take her out before she even realized what hit her. It'd be over before she could think to create something to defend herself with. He glanced around, watching the others. Kaminari? Useless in anything but a frontal assault. Zero? A joke against real villains. Even Todoroki, as powerful as he was, seemed unfocused, trapped in his own head. They weren't ready. They couldn't be ready without real pressure, real consequences. Izuku couldn't take it anymore. His hand moved without thinking, pulling the gun from his jacket, and before he even realized what he was doing, he aimed it squarely at Yaoyorozu as she hesitated once more. If this was real, he muttered under his breath, you'd be dead by now. Before anyone could react, he squeezed the trigger. The pop of the paintball was sharp, and the bright splash of neon blue paint hit Yaoyorozu's chest, freezing her in place. She looked down in shock, her eyes wide as she tried to process what had just happened. The rest of the class went silent, staring at him with disbelief. Izuku shifted his aim to Kaminari next, pulling the trigger twice. Kaminari barely had time to flinch before 2 more paintballs hit him, one on his shoulder and one on his thigh. Izuku lowered the gun, feeling nothing but a strange, cold satisfaction. You're all too soft, he said, his voice low. If this was a real battle, you'd be dead already. Midoriya. Aizawa's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. He stormed across the field, eyes blazing with fury. What the hell do you think you're doing? Izuku didn't flinch, didn't even look at him. Proving a point. Aizawa grabbed the gun out of Izuku's hand, eyes narrowed. You think this is some kind of game? You think pointing a weapon at your classmates is acceptable, even if it's just paintballs? It's training, Izuku replied flatly, his voice emotionless. Karasuma-sensei taught us that if we aren't prepared for the worst, we won't survive. We don't use guns here, Midoriya, Aizawa snapped, glaring at him. This isn't the way we train heroes. Maybe you should. Izuku's voice was colder now, sharper. Because the way you're doing it? These kids aren't ready. They'd die out there. He glanced at the others, who were still frozen in place, staring at him. If I can take them out this easily with paintballs, how do you think they'd handle a real villain? Aizawa clenched his jaw, clearly trying to keep his temper in check. They aren't going out to kill villains. They aren't assassins, they're going to be heroes. And if you want to be one too, then you are going to have to stop relying on your former training. It has no place in heroics. Izuku's gaze flickered. Hero. The word felt hollow in his mouth now. Maybe being a hero isn't what I want anymore. Aizawa blinked, caught off guard by the statement. But before he could respond, Izuku's mind wandered, pulled back to another time, another place. Flashback. Class 3E had divided into teams, and their objective was simple, determine whether they would save or kill Koro Sensei. Karma had been on the side of finishing their mission, as expected. Nagisa had joined his side, the side that wanted to save Koro Sensei. He'd always be on the side of saving, he wanted to be a hero, even after all the lessons. Koro Sensei believed in them, he had to save him. Izuku had crouched behind cover, heart pounding, paintballs flying through the air as they moved to execute their plan. His focus was sharp, his mind calculating every move, every position of his classmates. He'd make sure that they won. He'd save Koro Sensei. He'd be a hero. End flashback. I'm not sure that's what I want anymore, Izuku repeated, staring at the ground. The words felt foreign to him, like he was betraying his own dream, but they rang true in his mind. Before Aizawa could say anything else, Izuku's phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from the conversation. He glanced at it, seeing a brief flicker of code, a signal, one he didn't recognize before the screen blinked back to normal. Just a regular message notification. He didn't think much of it and shoved the phone back into his pocket. But for a second, something deep inside him whispered that something was off, that something had changed. Midoriya, Aizawa's voice interrupted his thoughts, pulling him back to reality. We'll talk about this later. Izuku nodded absently, his mind still spinning with memories, doubts, and the ever-growing sense that he didn't belong here. Not anymore. Unnoticed by Izuku, Ritsu's digital avatar flickered for a moment before returning to her normal state, her connection to Izuku's phone severed. She had managed to reach him if only for a second. Zashi, have I gone soft? He can't help asking the question after the major fuck-up he'd had with Izuku today. Telling the kid that guns had no place in heroics training when one of his colleagues, a man he respected as a hero who avoided the spotlight as much as he did used one. He'd like to blame that on his painkillers. But he'd had worse injuries with higher painkillers and he'd never reacted like that. He thinks it's because he hadn't expelled any of his kids except that grape-haired BSTRD, and he hadn't even done that on the first day. He'd only done that because Yaoyorozu came to him with a binder full of complaints from not only his class but practically every female student or female-presenting student in UA about the little sheet and the things he'd said and tried to do. He wonders if it could have been caused by trauma bonding. The events at the USJ had been horrific, his kids could have died, he could have died, and it's only thanks to Izuku's assassin training that he hadn't been more hurt by that creature and its master. He might even have briefly entertained the idea that it's his age. He's almost 35 now, ancient in terms of underground heroes. Most who took the same path as he had decided upon had either retired due to injury sustained on the sheet missions that no other hero would touch, or they laid in often unmarked graves if they even got a grave. What do you mean, babe? I yelled at Izuku today. He pulled his gun on his classmates and shot Yaoyorozu and Kaminari. He did what? Did you expel him? No, I didn't expel him, the kid only used paintballs, thank FING God. But I yelled at him, Zashi. After everything I know he's gone through, I yelled at him. Told him guns had no place in training. Then he got mad at me for being too soft on his classmates. He said that if he'd been a villain his classmates would have been dead. He's not wrong. I know not a lot of villains use firearms, but I haven't been giving my kids the situational awareness training they are going to need if they can't react fast enough to a gun being aimed at them. Yaoyorozu froze up, and nobody did anything even when Izuku got off 2 more shots at Kaminari. You've called them your kids twice in this conversation, babe. I think you might have gone soft. But is that really such a horrible thing? That you might find something to care about besides me? That the kids might see you as the hero you are instead of the harsh taskmaster that you present yourself as? Zashi, you know why I do what I do. It's not because I don't care about the kids that pass through my class, it's because I do. I see that most of them think heroics is all money or fame, or fighting villains. Or worse, they think it's a FING game. I can't send those kids out because they'll be killed just like that, you know. But my kids? The ones from this year? They've all got so much potential, even Izuku. And I'm afraid I'm FING it up because I am attached, Zashi. I can't tell if they'll be good heroes because I am attached, Zashi. I can't tell if I'm going to be able to help them be what's needed because I'm attached. But most of all, I can't keep FING up with Izuku because I'm attached. Zashi, I think Izuku keeps comparing me to this Karasuma sensei that trained him, and I think that comparison is the only reason he kept at heroics training. I'm worried that he'll go back to that man, and we'll lose that kid to a dark place that I can't rescue him from, and it'll be all my fault again and it'll kill me. Hizashi pulls him into a hug, and he leans into his husband's chest. Listening to his loud blonde's heartbeat is one of the few ways he's found that instantly calms him when he's upset like this. Then you fix it, babe. You be what he needs until he stops comparing you to that man. Because you aren't him. You didn't hurt him. You wouldn't hurt him. He'll get there, babe. I promise. You just have to keep supporting him. He sighs, I just hope that I'm enough. That kid deserves better. Then be better, babe. That's all you can do. Did Nedzu find anything new on this Karasuma sensei? No, nothing on any registry. No sign of any Department of Defense either. Kid might have been brainwashed, but then how am I supposed to fight that? I don't know, babe, but keep trying. Izuku deserves better. Snipe had taken his gun from him, and he can't say that he blames the man. He had pointed it at, and shot his classmates with it. You know, I was excited to hear a first-year heroics student wanting to have a gun license even if I wasn't particularly happy about the circumstances behind your proficiency. But then you went and pulled your gun on your classmates and I can't let you keep it. You know that. Izuku sighed. Yeah, I guess I can understand. Somehow, having this talk about responsible handling of a gun reminds him of Karasuma Sensei's talk after his classmates had knocked down that old man while free running. Flashback. Izuku raced down the alleyway, his breath steady, his muscles primed. His body moved on autopilot, each step calculated to navigate the narrow path with precision. His heart thudded in his chest, a mix of adrenaline and training sharpening his focus. Karasuma Sensei's voice echoed in his mind, reminding him to keep his awareness high during free running exercises. But just as he leapt over a low fence, his focus shattered. Watch it! A startled shout snapped him out of his rhythm, and Izuku's feet skidded on the pavement. His head whipped around in the direction of the sound, just in time to see one of his classmates plow into an elderly man, sending him crashing to the ground. Izuku's eyes widened in horror. The man let out a pained groan as he hit the ground hard, and the student froze, unsure of what to do. Without hesitation, Izuku sprinted over, kneeling next to the old man. His mind raced. What should he do first? Check for injuries? Apologize? Call for help? I'm so sorry, are you hurt? Izuku's voice trembled with guilt as he gently reached out to the man. Before he could say or do more, Karasuma Sensei appeared, his sharp gaze sweeping over the scene. The air grew heavy with disappointment. Everyone, stop, Karasuma ordered, his voice cold and firm. The students gathered around, their earlier energy drained in the face of the accident. Izuku clenched his fists, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He should have noticed the man earlier. He should have been more careful. Karasuma knelt beside the old man, quickly assessing him. After a few tense moments, the man waved off the concern, shakily rising to his feet with Karasuma's help. I'm fine, the old man grumbled, dusting off his clothes. Just a little knock. No harm done. Izuku bit his lip, guilt gnawing at him. Karasuma's stern eyes landed on Izuku, and though his voice was calm, the disappointment was clear. Izuku, you were in the lead. You had the best visibility. You're responsible for watching the path ahead, not just for yourself, but for your teammates. This isn't just about speed, it's about awareness. Izuku nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. I understand, Karasuma Sensei. I should have been more careful. Free running isn't just about physical agility, Karasuma continued, addressing the entire group now. It's about situational awareness and control. You need to learn to anticipate obstacles, both stationary and human. Izuku's eyes lowered, the lesson hitting him hard. His instinct to move fast, to push ahead, had clouded his judgment. We're training to become more than just quick, Karasuma said, standing tall again. We're training to be assassins, and with that comes a responsibility. No innocent bystanders should ever get caught in the crossfire. That's what separates you from the targets we take down. The student stood silent, absorbing the weight of Karasuma's words. The old man, now steady on his feet, gave a gruff nod. Just be more careful next time, huh? You young ones are always in such a rush. Izuku, his voice small, gave a deep bow. I'm sorry. The old man chuckled and waved it off again, but Karasuma's lesson lingered. Remember this, Karasuma said, locking eyes with Izuku before turning to the rest of the class. In the field, one mistake can cost lives. This was a minor one learned from it. Izuku nodded solemnly, the weight of Karasuma's lesson settling deep within him. He wouldn't forget this. Not the feeling of failure or the importance of responsibility. Present day. Izuku stood in front of the stadium, his heart pounding in his chest. The sports festival was in full swing, the roar of the crowd vibrating in his bones. He had been told not to compete, the faculty cautious about his unstable quirk and the trauma that still lingered from his past. But standing here, looking out at the competition, Izuku knew he couldn't sit on the sidelines. He clenched his fists, his mind drifting to his old classmates. Assassination classroom where every day had been life or death. Everyone thought their training was wrong, unethical even, but Izuku knew better. They hadn't just trained him to fight, they had trained him to think, to adapt, to overcome. People might have written off his past as dangerous, but today, he would prove otherwise. I won't take first, he muttered to himself. But I need to prove I can still stand among them. The signal for the first event, the obstacle course, blared loudly. Izuku's body moved before his thoughts could catch up, launching into a sprint along with the others. His senses were honed, sharper than they'd ever been, as he weaved through the mass of students. Ahead, Todoroki's ice surged forward, freezing robots in place as he sped past. Izuku smirked, using the chaos to his advantage. While Todoroki's ice incapacitated the obstacles, Izuku leaped gracefully over them, his movements fluid, agile, almost predatory. He didn't need to attack or destroy the robots, he simply navigated through the openings left in their frozen frames. The ravine loomed next. Izuku's heart skipped a beat as the ground vanished into nothingness beneath him. But this wasn't a problem. His eyes flicked to Todoroki, whose ice stretched over the abyss, creating a perfect path. Izuku sprinted towards the edge, then jumped high, his legs extending as he landed gracefully on the ice path. He didn't lose a step, sliding easily along it, shifting his weight with perfect balance. The cold air stung his face, but his mind was clear. Every breath steady. Every move precise. Thanks for the shortcut, he thought as he sailed past another group of students struggling to clear the fall. Next, the landmines. Izuku frowned, watching students hesitate, their minds working out strategies. He didn't have time for that. He glanced ahead. Todoroki had already encased much of the area in ice, but his path wasn't perfect. Izuku, however, knew how to exploit gaps in patterns. He watched for a few seconds, studying the rhythm of the mines, waiting for the moment when he could dart through. He leaped, skipping over a detonated mine and hitting the ground in perfect sync with Todoroki's advancing ice. It was a dance, an intricate display of timing and control. It wasn't about being the fastest. It wasn't about victory. It was about showing that he could, that his past hadn't been wasted. That he wasn't broken. When Izuku crossed the finish line in third place, he barely registered the cheers. His mind was elsewhere, thinking about the consequences. He'd been told not to participate, after all. But as he caught his breath, the looming figure of Aizawa with Nezu peeking out from his capture scarf approached him. The principal tilted his head, his beady eyes fixed on Izuku with curiosity. "You do realize," Nezu began, his voice soft yet piercing, "that you were advised not to compete." Izuku sighed, running a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of his decision settle in his chest. "Yeah," he muttered. "But I had to. I couldn't just sit back. I needed to prove to myself and to everyone that I'm not a failure." Nezu's gaze remained on him for a long moment, thoughtful. "You've shown a level of competency far beyond what was expected of you, but there are still rules, Midoriya." Izuku straightened, the defiance that had fueled his decision flickering for a moment. "If you expel me, fine. I'm not even sure I want to be a hero anymore. Maybe it's just not for me." A pause. Nezu blinked, then chuckled, a high-pitched sound that echoed unsettlingly. "Expel you? No. That would be a waste of potential." He stepped closer, looking up at Izuku. "I allowed you to compete because I didn't want to lose you, Midoriya. Your instincts, your strategy, they're valuable, even if you don't see it yet." Izuku's eyes widened slightly. Nezu wasn't angry. He was relieved? "Still," Nezu continued, "you will face some consequences for disobeying orders. But for now, focus on what comes next. You've proven you belong in this festival. Now, let's see how you handle what comes next. But know this, if you harm any of the students beyond what is expected in the festival, we will be looking into expulsion." He nodded. "I wouldn't expect anything less." Izuku found himself paired with a strange mix of teammates, Hitoshi Shinso, Mei Hatsum, and Shoji. It wasn't the most conventional group, but that didn't matter. Izuku was no stranger to unorthodox teams. If anything, he thrived in them. Hitoshi, calm and calculating, focused on brainwashing opponents when necessary. Mei, her chaotic enthusiasm for gadgets and strategy, added an unpredictable element to their plans. Shoji, with his ability to track and cover multiple angles, provided the perfect defense. Izuku's goal wasn't to win. But second place? That was achievable. The battle began, and their team moved like clockwork. Izuku's quick reflexes allowed him to snatch headbands from unsuspecting teams, dodging and weaving through the chaos as Shoji shielded their own headband. Mei's gadgets gave them the advantage, disrupting opponents with well-timed distractions, while Hitoshi immobilized a few teams long enough for Izuku to dart in and out, grabbing what they needed. With a few swift movements, Izuku secured enough points to launch them into second place. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, but none of it mattered. This wasn't about glory. It was about proving that he could and he had. As the round ended, the team disbanded, and Izuku stood there, breathing heavily but feeling lighter than he had in months. He'd done it. He hadn't won, but he didn't need to. Just being here, being in the game, he'd proven that much. And for now, that was enough. Facing the one-on-one battles should be easy. He'd done enough sparring with his 3E classmates to know how to both take out a single opponent as well as multiple. But of course, because his luck always seemed to hate him, he would be facing Hitoshi first. On the surface, it seemed an easy win. He'd had Hitoshi on his team for the second event, and he knew what the other boy's quirk was and how it worked. It would be easy for him to take the win. To continue on. On the other hand, would it really be fair to Shinso to take the other boy out so quickly when the purple-haired kid wanted to be in the hero course far more than Izuku thinks that he might want to be? He doesn't know. Stepping out into the ring, there is a silence that he likes. The crowd doesn't like him very much, and he is okay with that. No matter what happened going forward, he knew he had options. If all else failed, he could ask All Might for an internship. It wouldn't be something he would enjoy. He and his mentor were on better terms, but he still felt like he wasn't the person All Might expected or wanted him to be. In this corner, the dark horse of the hero course, Midoriya Izuku. In the other corner, the unexpected underdog from Gen Ed, Hitoshi Shinso. Okay boys, you know the rules. I expect a clean fight. Begin. I've heard so many interesting things about you. How you don't act like a heroic student. How the teachers had to ban you from competing because they are scared of what you will do. How is that fair to the rest of us? Those of us that had to settle for less just because we couldn't take out any robots. Those of us that really want to be a hero. He says nothing. It's nothing he hasn't thought himself going into this fight. He isn't the person that he was before. He isn't the bright-eyed hero fanboy he had been. He had blood on his hands. But Koro Sensei had told them before they'd had to take him out that they could be more than assassins. That he could be a hero. Didn't he owe it to Koro Sensei to do his best? Didn't he owe it to the person he used to be? Do you really think so little of me that you think you don't have to pay attention? He snapped back to the arena. He makes a decision. He lunges, taking Hitoshi by surprise. Of course you'd resort to physical violence. That's what you're good at, aren't you? Yes. I am good at physical violence. He says simply, and for a second Hitoshi looks triumphant, but they are too close to the edge of the arena, and before Hitoshi can give him a command, he goes boneless. It's enough to push Hitoshi over the white line. He has won. But he didn't really want to win. He offers a hand to Hitoshi, but he slaps it away. Should have known they'd keep the perfect quirked kid even if that kid is a killer over the kid with the villainous quirk. He wants to say something more, but Shinso isn't wrong. So he just walks past him and into the area to wait for his next match, which will be against Shoto Todoroki. The air was thick with tension as Todoroki entered the waiting room, his footsteps echoing in the quiet space. Izuku hadn't expected company, least of all from him. When Todoroki stood in front of him, eyes cold but determined, Izuku couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. What was this about? I'm going to win against you, Todoroki said bluntly. Izuku blinked, taken aback. Okay? He couldn't quite grasp why Todoroki had come all this way just to tell him that. He wasn't the type to gloat, and this seemed unnecessary. Look, Todoroki, I don't really care, Izuku sighed, leaning back in his seat. This whole hero thing, I'm not sure if it's for me anymore. If you win, that's great. If I win, well, it's not ideal, but maybe it'll help me decide if this is really who I am. Or if being an assassin is more my speed. Todoroki's eyes narrowed slightly. You may be All Might's son, but you truly are allowed to be whatever you want, aren't you? The words hit Izuku like a slap. He almost laughed actually, he did, choking on the unexpected humor in the statement. All Might's son? I'm not All Might's kid. My dad disappeared the day I was diagnosed quirkless by mistake, by the way. He paused, the laughter fading. And as for being whatever I want. Yeah, I guess that's true. Todoroki's gaze hardened. There was something dangerous about the way he looked at Izuku now. How nice for you to have a choice, he muttered. Some of us would kill for that. Izuku raised a brow, curious. What's that supposed to mean? Todoroki was silent for a moment, eyes shifting as if deciding whether to say more. Then he spoke, and what followed shook Izuku to his core. Have you ever heard of quirk marriages? The words tumbled out, cold and clinical, as Todoroki began spilling his family's darkest secrets. Endeavor. The abuse. The way his father had used his children, used him as tools to surpass All Might, to craft the perfect hero. How his mother had been broken under the weight of it all. How he had been scarred by it. Izuku sat in stunned silence, horror creeping into his veins. He had always known Endeavor was ruthless, but this? This was beyond anything he had imagined. Was this what being a hero meant? Protecting the reputation of men like Endeavor? Standing by while people like Todoroki suffered because of a dream forced onto them? He swallowed hard. You know I'm an assassin, right? Izuku's voice came out colder than he intended. I'd give you the friends and family rate if you want something done. Permanently. Todoroki's eyes widened ever so slightly, but his face remained impassive. You'd offer that? Even as a heroic student? I could ruin you with this information. Why would you? Izuku shrugged, leaning forward, elbows resting on his knees. Like I said, I'm not sure about this hero thing anymore. It used to be my dream. But dreams change. People change. If you want, I'll take a dive out there. Let you win. Your father would be happy with that, wouldn't he? You beating All Might's kid. For a split second, Izuku saw something flicker in Todoroki's eyes, something like amusement. You just called yourself All Might's kid. Izuku chuckled. If Todoroki wasn't Todoroki, he could have sworn the guy was almost smiling. I'll see you on the field, Todoroki. Standing up, Izuku held out his hand. Todoroki looked at it for a moment, then took it in a firm shake. If you want me to take that dive, Izuku continued, his voice quiet now, just signal me with your fire. That's all you have to do. Todoroki didn't say anything. The 2-minute warning blared over the intercom, signaling that the match was about to start. Without a word, Todoroki turned and walked away, leaving Izuku with far more to think about than he had anticipated. As he watched the two-tone boy disappear down the hall, Izuku couldn't help but wonder, was this really his fight to win? Are you certain this will work, Ritsu? There is a 60-40 chance of either this working or failing. I'm not fond of those odds. Are you sure you want to risk this, Irina? He's my kid too, Karasuma. No risk, no reward. He nodded. Ready, Nagisa? I'm ready. Let's do this. Nagisa is connected to what looks like an EEG machine. But really it is a machine that boosts his lagging connection to Koro Sensei's power. Something they found. That interacted well enough with the leftovers of Izuku's power to send Ritsu through. Now is their test to see if they can send a person through, and Irina was the one to volunteer. Not that Karasuma or any of his kids hadn't wanted to volunteer, but Irina had nixed that. These kids need you more than they need me, and if this works, then we all go. We all rescue him together. There's nothing more to be said. Stepping out into the arena, Izuku glances at Todoroki. There was frost coming from Todoroki's left side, and there, just visible, was the flickers of a small flame from the boy's fingers. Todoroki was asking for him to take the dive that he'd offered. He smiled. In this corner, the dark horse of the hero course, Midoriya Izuku. In the other corner we have the ice prince of 1A, Todoroki Shudo. Begin. He darted forward, just missing the wave of ice that came flowing forward, an iceberg, a wave of cold unlike anything he'd ever felt before. He dodged it. He had to make it look good even if he was going to take the dive. He had to make it look good. Your ice is impressive, but why do you keep holding back? Todoroki paused, looking like he was confused. I won't use his power. He pulled it one for all, the power roaring into him. It's not his power, and more than mine is All Might's. You aren't your father, Todoroki. You shouldn't let him keep deciding who you are going to be. You promised you'd take a dive, Todoroki whispered as he came closer. Why does it matter to you if I'm not using his fire? Because even if I don't want to be a hero, even if I think people like Shinso deserve it more than me, I still give it my all. Will you apologize to the dead when you could have saved them by using your fire, by saying, sorry I couldn't let my father win? Todoroki looks like he's been struck, and for a second, fire erupts in his arm before he shakes it off. I can't. You don't understand. I understand that if you continue half-butting it as a hero, people will die. If I continue from here, I will put my all into being a hero. Even if I'm unsure if I deserve to call myself one. Can you say the same? If I let you go forward, will you put your everything into it? You really are an idiot. Todoroki smiles as his right side bursts into flame, as his left lets out ice. A huge bang as the superheated air meets the cold air. When he can see again, he sees that he's been pushed back across the white line. No matter what happened from here, he'd been a hero to Shoto at least. That had to count for something. She came to in an arena, at the very back of an audience. Her green bean is down there, facing another kid with red and white bicolor hair. For a moment she wants to call out, to tell him that she is there. But she knows she won't be heard above this crowd. She takes a moment to watch her green bean facing against the bicolored boy. She is stunned. Izuku had never given any indication that where he came from, everyone had powers like Koro Sensei, but she supposes it makes sense. She watches as her green bean fights the other boy. He's not putting his all into the fight, she can tell. She gets to see the end of the fight as her green bean is blown across the white line, signaling his loss before she feels a pulling and she sees Karasuma's face. Well? It worked. Karasuma smiled. Just wait, son, we're coming. Traveling to another world was much like being squeezed through a toothpaste tube. Or at least, that was the best metaphor Karasuma could think of as Nagisa's power connected them. He'd closed his eyes at some point from the pressure. When he finally opened them, the moon was out intact. That was his first clue that they had succeeded. Ritsu, connect to local news outlets. See if you can find out where we are, and if Izuku's location comes up, Karasuma ordered, eyes scanning the unfamiliar skyline. He was at some kind of arena, fighting another kid with powers. When I got there, Irina interjected, adjusting her hair with a thoughtful frown. That doesn't mean he's still there. Karasuma gave her a brief apologetic look. Sorry. Nagisa, does Koro Sensei's guide have anything on world travel that could help us? Nagisa flipped through the small manual. Just that we should avoid drawing attention to the fact that we're not from this world. Right. So we blend in. What are our resources? Karasuma began ticking off on his fingers. They speak Japanese here, so this must be a different version of Japan. We could use some of the reward money we were given to rent or buy a place. But I don't like that plan. We need somewhere no one will look so we can regroup once we find Izuku. Dad, looks like we're in a place called Hosu, Ritsu's digital voice chimed in. Specifically, the red light district. There are lots of warehouses for sale. And after a little wandering, they found one, a massive warehouse with a loft space that had a kitchen. It was for sale, cheap, and barely made a dent in their reward money. Karasuma used a fake name to buy it. Within hours, they had set up makeshift sleeping areas, a training space, and even an infirmary. He hoped it would be enough. I found him, Dad. Karasuma raced to the living room, where Irina and the kids were sitting in front of a TV. It showed his Izuku facing off against a boy with red and white hair. How old is this broadcast? Karasuma demanded, heart pounding. 1 week, Ritsu answered, but the sports festival happens annually at a school called UA. Izuku is registered there. Before Karasuma could feel relief, Ritsu's voice grew tense. But Dad, someone is trying to hack me back. Disconnect. Karasuma ordered, rushing to her console. I'm trying. The screen glitched as Ritsu's face stuttered and froze, sending panic through the group. Ritsu! Hang on. Karasuma's hands trembled as he powered down the device. His children were frantically holding their phones as if that could help her. Suddenly, Ritsu's face flickered back. I'm okay. My system rebooted. Ritsu! Her siblings hugged their phones like they were hugging her. Ow! Okay, no more hugs. Sorry, Dad. I could only trace Izuku as far as the class lists. He still has his class phone. Once he's outside UA, I'll be able to reach him, and we can bring him home. Karasuma sighed in relief, but his mind was racing. They were closer now, but whoever tried to hack back into their systems, they weren't just facing normal security. Nedzu stared at the screen in front of him, intrigued and horrified. It wasn't the first time someone had tried hacking UA's servers, but this was the first time he'd encountered something or someone this peculiar. At first, the intruder had slipped in under the radar, perusing the public records. Nedzu let them. He often watched these attempts with mild amusement. But then, they aimed for the class registration lists. That was when he'd struck back. What he hadn't expected was the panicked cry from the intruder. I'm only looking for my brother. Stop attacking me. A face too human, too emotional appeared on his screen. Nedzu's mind reeled as realization dawned. It wasn't a person hacking in. It was an AI. One sophisticated enough to mimic human emotion. No, it felt like it had human emotion. He couldn't let this go. He had to know more. This wasn't a normal AI, not even one that should exist. Nedzu quickly reversed his attack, shifting gears to protect the AI. Whoever created it, or if it was a quirk, would be hunted down if the wrong people discovered them. UA wasn't perfect, but it was safe. He could make sure of that. And if this AI was looking for its brother, then there was a student at UA whose family might be in grave danger. He had to find out who that was. Izuku sat in the classroom, staring at the two offers in front of him. 2. It was more than he deserved. He wasn't sure if he wanted to be a hero anymore, but he had promised Todoroki, promised himself. Backing down now would insult his classmates, insult everything they'd been through. Still, something gnawed at him. The first offer, from Edshot, seemed like the logical choice. But the second name, Gran Torino, something about it tugged at him. Without thinking, he circled Gran Torino. Izuku, stay after class, Aizawa said, voice low, eyes locking on him. We need to talk. Izuku followed his teacher in silence, tension knotting in his stomach. They stopped in a small, dimly lit office beside the teacher's lounge. Aizawa closed the door behind them, leaning back against the desk, arms crossed. Look, Midoriya, Aizawa began, his tone uncharacteristically soft. What you did at the sports festival. It has to stop. Izuku's heart sank. He knew this was coming. Knew it wasn't good enough. You need to decide if this program is really right for you, Aizawa continued, each word deliberate, as if he was carefully choosing how to break the news. Nedzu and we've talked. We're allowing your internship. But you'll be under my watch. If I don't see any real progress, if you don't change, you'll be dropped from the program. Izuku stared at the floor, his grip tightening on the anti-sensei knife he carried out of habit. Every instinct told him to argue, to defend himself, but his voice was stuck in his throat. I understand, he whispered. But did he? Did he understand why his heart still craved both of his quirks, the one breaking his bones and the other linking him to family? Aizawa sighed heavily, the frustration and exhaustion clear in his posture. Midoriya, you don't have to kill yourself trying to be something you're not. You can be a hero. But this path, it's not the only way. Izuku swallowed hard. He wanted to explain. Wanted to say that he couldn't just forget the training that had saved him, that shaped him. He wanted to scream that he didn't know how to stop. But all he said was, okay. Aizawa's expression softened, just a fraction. You're dismissed. Izuku nodded, turning for the door. Just as he reached it, he froze. Midoriya, Aizawa's voice stopped him. Take care of yourself. You're not alone in this. Izuku blinked. It wasn't what he expected. It wasn't the lecture he thought he'd hear. Thank you, he managed, and left, a heaviness settling in his chest. Outside, All Might was waiting. Ah, young Midoriya. All Might's booming voice greeted him with a smile, but Izuku could see something different in his eyes. They walked in silence for a while, the weight of everything hanging between them. Finally, All Might spoke, I see you've chosen Gran Torino for your internship. Izuku nodded, unsure of what to say. Gran Torino was my teacher, All Might admitted with a nervous chuckle. He's eccentric, to say the least. Izuku frowned. Eccentric? All Might gave him a reassuring smile. His training will be different from anything you've experienced. But he's one of the best. Trust his methods, even when they don't make sense. Izuku nodded, though his stomach twisted with uncertainty. There's one more thing, Midoriya. All Might's tone grew serious. I watched you at the festival, and I was proud. Izuku stared at him, wide-eyed. Proud? But I didn't even win. I wasn't supposed to compete. Winning isn't everything, All Might said, his voice steady. You held back when it mattered. You've shown me that you're still the same boy I believed in. The one who fights for others. And for that, I'm proud. Izuku's breath hitched, emotions bubbling to the surface. I thought I let you down. I thought I wasn't who you wanted me to be. I trust you to find your own way. Izuku's breath caught in his throat, the words hitting harder than any punch he'd ever taken. For so long, he had carried the weight of All Might's expectations on his shoulders, believing he had to become something more than he was, someone more powerful, more perfect. Hearing those words, the doubt he had felt slowly began to lift. You trust me? Izuku whispered, still grappling with the emotion swelling in his chest. His fists clenched at his sides, not in anger but in disbelief. All Might stepped closer, placing his large, warm hand on Izuku's shoulder. Of course, young Midoriya. You've shown me more strength of heart than I ever could have asked for. Power is important, yes, but it's your spirit, your desire to help others, that's what makes you worthy of being a hero. It's what makes you worthy of being my successor. Izuku felt the dam break, tears filling his eyes. He looked away quickly, trying to hide them, but his voice betrayed him. I don't deserve that. Not after everything. After what happened at the festival. After I almost. Stop, All Might interrupted softly but firmly. His voice wasn't scolding, just understanding. You didn't do anything wrong. You're still learning, still growing. And part of being a hero, part of being human is making mistakes. It's how you recover from those mistakes that truly matters. Izuku swallowed hard, the tears slipping freely now. He wiped at his face, embarrassed, but All Might didn't let him go. He squeezed his shoulder with a fatherly grip, steady and unyielding. You held back, Izuku, All Might continued. His voice thick with emotion. You made a choice that wasn't easy, but it was the right one. And that showed me. It showed me I wasn't wrong about you. You are the right person to carry on this legacy. Izuku trembled beneath All Might's words. For so long, he'd questioned if he was even worthy of inheriting One for All, if he was capable of living up to the legacy of the symbol of peace. But in this moment, with All Might standing before him, the weight of his mentor's belief felt like something he could finally bear. Thank you, Izuku choked out, barely able to get the words past the lump in his throat. Thank you so much. All Might's smile grew wider, and there was a flicker of pride in his eyes. No, Izuku. Thank you. They stood there for a few moments longer, the silence between them filled with unspoken understanding. Then, as if realizing they had shared enough emotion for one evening, All Might gave a small, boisterous laugh and clapped his hands together. Now, you should head home and rest up. You've got a long journey ahead of you with Gran Torino, and trust me, you'll need your energy. Izuku sniffled but managed a shaky smile. I'll do my best. All Might grinned, his energy returning in full force. I know you will, young Midoriya. I know you will. With one final nod, Izuku turned to leave, his heart lighter than it had been in weeks' chapter text. Aizawa sat alone in his dimly lit office, the faint light from the desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. His eyes drifted over the papers in front of him, expulsion forms with Midoriya Izuku's name at the top, but his mind wasn't there. It was stuck somewhere between the present and the weight of the decision that hung over him like a dark cloud. Midoriya had always been a puzzle. Since the sports festival, though, that puzzle had become something Aizawa wasn't sure he could solve. It wasn't just about the boy's ability or even his quirk, both of which were extraordinary in their own right. It was the doubt. That lingering uncertainty Aizawa had seen in Midoriya's eyes, in his posture, in the words he had spoken to the whole world. I don't even know if I want to be a hero anymore. Aizawa leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his unkempt hair. Those words had cut deeper than he wanted to admit. He'd seen kids question themselves before seeing them break under the immense pressure that came with training to be a pro hero. But with Midoriya, it felt different. More personal. Like there was a fire in him beyond the assassin's cold persona. A heroic fire. Now that fire was flickering. Dying. He sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. We can't keep dragging this out, he muttered to himself. Not if he doesn't show us he wants this. It wasn't just about Midoriya anymore. Aizawa had a class full of kids to think about. Kids who were fighting tooth and nail to prove they belonged at UA. Could he keep putting their safety and progress on the line for someone who wasn't even sure he wanted to be there? The answer, as much as he hated it, was no. The knock on the door came softly, almost hesitant. Come in, he said gruffly. The door creaked open, and his husband slipped in, his usual high energy subdued for once. You okay, Sho? You've been in here for hours. Aizawa grunted, not bothering to look up. Just thinking. About Midoriya? There was no need to answer. Yamada could read him like a book, and they both knew it. Yamada stepped further inside, his eyes flicking to the papers on the desk. His brow furrowed as he picked one up. Sho. Is this? Are you really thinking about expelling him? Aizawa didn't answer at first, staring at the papers as if they held the solution to all his problems. I don't know, he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to. But what choice do I have? He doesn't want to be here, and I can't put his needs above the rest of the class. The kids who actually want to be heroes. Sho, Yamada said softly, sitting on the edge of the desk, this isn't like your other expulsions. Midoriya's been through so much already. Maybe he just needs more time. Aizawa let out a frustrated sigh. Time isn't something we have in endless supply, Zashi. The longer I wait, the more danger he's in. If his heart's not in this, it'll get him killed. I can't just let that happen. You think sending him away is the better option? Yamada asked, his voice calm but firm. Sho, if you do this, you're not just pushing him out of UA. You're pushing him away from any hope of finding his way back. He'll see it as you giving up on him. And what am I supposed to do? Aizawa snapped, the frustration bubbling over. Keep him in my class and let him drag the others down? Let him get hurt or worse. I've expelled kids before, Zashi. Kids with potential. They didn't die. They found their own paths. But none of them were like Midoriya, Yamada countered. None of them had his quirk. Or his history. If you send him away, Sho, you won't just be cutting him loose. You'll be leaving him with nothing. And a kid like that. With a quirk like his, with training like his? You're creating a dangerous situation. Aizawa's shoulders slumped as the weight of Yamada's words settled over him. You think I don't know that? I'm terrified of what he'll become if I expel him. But what choice do I have? Keep him here, watch him fall apart? Or send him away, hoping that maybe he'll find another way? Yamada was quiet for a long moment, staring at the expulsion papers in his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. I'm afraid, Sho. I'm afraid of what he'll become if you go through with this. If you push him away, all you'll get is an angry kid with too much power and too little guidance. And maybe, one day, he'll come back. And not as the hero we both know he can be. Aizawa felt his chest tighten, the weight of his decision pressing down on him harder than ever. He didn't say anything. What was there to say? Yamada had voiced the very fear that had been gnawing at him for weeks. He looked down at the expulsion forms, his hand hovering over the signature line. He wanted to help Midoriya. He really did. But how? How could he balance the needs of the class with the needs of one broken boy? Aizawa's fingers twitched, the pen slipping from his grasp and clattering onto the desk. Sho, Yamada said quietly, you don't have to decide tonight. Aizawa didn't answer. He just stared at the papers, the silence between them growing heavier with each passing second. And in that silence, the question hung unanswered, leaving the future of one troubled boy and perhaps much more dangling precariously in the balance. Izuku had been in a bit of a mood since Aizawa had told him that he could be dropped from the heroics program if he didn't shape up. But then, hadn't he been questioning if this was truly his dream anymore since the moment he'd opened his eyes to his old bedroom, to his old life? Hadn't he offered All Might one for all back when he'd noticed his once favorite hero was scared of him? Was scared of what he'd become. All Might had apologized though, had told him that he'd be there for him in whatever he chose to do. That meant that even if he put his all into the internship and Aizawa still didn't think he wanted this, he'd have the perfect excuse for saying, "I tried," while slipping into a life that was more of a comfort than his old one had ever been. Something he hadn't bothered telling his mother, or anyone for that matter, was that he had tried in the beginning when he'd realized he'd been dragged to a different world. He'd tried so hard to hang on to the hero hopeful he was. Had tried so hard to believe it was only an act, even as he gained experience. Even as he became closer to Karasuma than he ever had been to his mother. Karasuma, his 3E classmates, Koro Sensei, Beach Sensei, they all had believed in him even when he hadn't. Had given him unique training that he was better at than he ever had been at anything he'd tried to do to show he could be a hero. Then again, he hadn't put any effort into becoming a better hero hopeful until after All Might, had he? He hadn't trained by going for runs unless you count running from the other kids. He hadn't weight-lifted unless you counted lifting the almost 100 pounds backpack he had to carry to keep the other kids from destroying his schoolbooks. He hadn't tried to join a dojo unless you counted the fact that no dojo would let a quirkless join. Those were all excuses. He could have found a way. He could have lied about having a quirk. Could have begged for lessons, could have done whatever was necessary to improve his chances. All he'd done was keep his head down, trying to disappear, trying to soothe Bakugo's fragile ego instead of fighting back. Even if he knew that had he fought back he'd have been expelled, wouldn't that have been better than spending all that time and effort on those idiots in his school who kept trying to keep him in his place? No, whatever his original quirk had been, the one that was boosted by One for All, that was what had given him the chance to improve more than anything he could have learned from UA, he could see that now. But he still couldn't let it go. He'd promised himself, he'd promised Todoroki. He'd promised Koro Sensei. He'd put his all into this internship. If they expelled him, that was fine. He'd go back to being an assassin, surely there was a call for one even in this hero-obsessed society of theirs. He'd do only the jobs that he wanted to do, of course. But he'd do it. His phone starts ringing, with a familiar tune, and he picks it up, seeing a familiar face, he almost drops it. Ritsu? Izuku. I finally got through to you. Am I dreaming? He asks breathlessly. He hopes he isn't, but can't count it out. Izuku, I don't have a lot of time. We're all here. Dad is here. Keep your phone on you and when you get closer to where we are I'll contact you again. Her face leaves his screen and he drops his phone. Ritsu is here, and she said that the rest of the class is here. He wants to race out to find them, but he doesn't know where they are. Even Ritsu is having trouble connecting with him. It's a miracle they even could connect considering that the connections were from different worlds and all. He'd have to wait and hope that either a chance would come up during his internship or he'd wait until after the internship. Either way, he was done with UA. His 3E family came first. Coming to the address that was on his form, Izuku stared at the building in front of him. He's starting to wonder if he should have chosen Edshot instead, but then again, sneaking away from whatever hero staffed this agency would be much easier than sneaking away from someone titled the Ninja Hero. Well, are you going in or not? Aizawa's tired drawl rings out from behind him. He pushes against the door, surprised to find it unlocked. Inside, it is dark and he keeps a close hand on his anti-sensei knife as he walks in. By the dim light, he finally sees it. An old man is lying on the floor in what he would have thought was blood if he didn't smell the ketchup on the sausages from here. He almost smiled, it seemed like a prank Koro Sensei would play to see if they were paying attention. What a shabby attempt at an assassination, he spoke loudly, noticing the wince from the body on the floor and a waste of good food. He picks up the sausages, and ignoring the body on the floor bites into one. Toshi? Is that you, boy? I'm sorry I seem to have dropped my breakfast. I'm Izuku, and this is my babysitter Eraserhead, he motions to Aizawa, who is staring at him disapprovingly. Well, it didn't matter now. He didn't care what Aizawa thought. He'd use this as the golden opportunity it was. So you're the kid Toshi chose? Don't see why that needs a babysitter. But let's see what you can do. He's not going to tell this man the truth, that he's an assassin who still has One for All and is planning to return to his family as soon as this idiot turns his back. Torino starts bouncing against the walls in the agency, and if he didn't observe Koro Sensei breaking his speed limit to go get Italian ice cream, he'd have no idea where Torino is. As it is, he can see exactly where Torino is and where he will be. He powers up one for all, feeling that same ocean that Aizawa had helped him to find. Dipping in until he's almost halfway, and then letting loose a punch to Torino's solar plexus. He knows it's a bit more powerful than he intended as Torino goes down in a puddle of limbs, gasping on the floor. Sorry, he says truthfully, he feels just as bad as when they had knocked over the old man while he'd been leading the free-running exercise. You're just not as fast as Koro Sensei was, and I guess I still don't know my strength. Torino waves him off. No, you did exactly what I'd expect someone to do to an unknown. But really, most people find my quirk makes me too fast to be detected. How'd this Koro Sensei do it? Koro Sensei could travel at Mach 20 speeds for fun, and one of the more popular methods of attempting to assassinate him was throwing knives at him. Chiba was the best of us at that, but we all attempted it at least once. Torino is silent. Izuku, why don't you go put on your costume upstairs? The room on the right used to be Toshi's when he trained with me. I don't think he'd mind too much if you'd use it. It's even better than he expected. He pulls on his uniform quickly, intending to use the PRD in between Aizawa explaining his tendencies and when he's supposed to be changing to get out. Unfortunately, the upper level seems to have been constructed before there were laws saying that there had to be emergency exits on all levels. There wasn't even a window that he could easily slip out of. Well, it wasn't ideal, but now that he had his 3E assassin's outfit on, he was happy to just wait until Torino would take them out on patrol, as he'd have to do as a hero with an intern. As night fell, the agency remained silent save for the occasional creak of the old building. Gran Torino was already nursing a bruise where Izuku's punch had landed earlier, sitting with Aizawa in the dimly lit kitchen. The grizzled hero took a deep breath, staring down at his tea. That kid, Izuku, he's not like the others, is he? Aizawa leaned back in his chair, his usual tired expression becoming a bit more serious. He's a unique case. Good kid, but he's gone through more than the others. He's holding a lot back, and if I'm being honest, I'm not sure where his heart is anymore. Torino hummed, his eyes narrowing. He's fast. Saw through me in a way that not many can. But there's something else. Have you ever asked him what he's really thinking? He carries something in him that feels different. Aizawa sighed, pulling his scarf tighter around his shoulders. I've tried. The kid's slippery, and not just with his combat skills. I can't shake the feeling that if I push too hard, he'll be gone before I can do anything. He's already on the edge. Torino frowned, taking a slow sip of his tea. Keep an eye on him, Eraserhead. Toshi picked him for a reason, but we can't afford to let him slip through our fingers. The next day, the air in the city was heavy with tension. Izuku sat on the train beside Aizawa, wearing his 3E assassin's outfit underneath a hoodie, feeling an odd sense of foreboding. He could sense something was wrong. His instincts, honed from countless assassination attempts, were on high alert. Also, he was watching for an opportunity to just book it. When the attack came, it was sudden. The screech of metal echoed through the train as the Nomu descended upon the city of Hosu, smashing through the streets. Aizawa was on his feet immediately, barking orders to Izuku. Stay on the train. Do not engage. We'll handle this. Izuku's stomach twisted. He wasn't even sure why he cared, but the thought of staying behind gnawed at him. He'd been disconnected from the UA students, but that didn't mean he wanted to see them hurt. His mind wandered to Ida. He'd remembered the other boy had taken an internship in Hosu. But this was his opportunity. All he had to do was leave. Aizawa gave him a pointed look, his eyes glowing red. Midoriya. Stay. Izuku bit his lip, nodding stiffly as Aizawa leapt from the train. The second Aizawa disappeared, Izuku pulled out his phone, his hands shaking. He had no real loyalty to UA, but Ida. He contemplated for a while, should he leave or should he go? He made a decision and pressed Ritsu. Ritsu, it's me. Can you let Dad know I'm going after one of my classmates from UA? Izuku, no. Ritsu's voice came through, the familiar mechanical tone overlaying her concern. This is dangerous. You don't know what you're dealing with. Just wait where you are, Dad will come to you. I can't. If I don't go, he'll die. He hung up, slipping out of the train before Ritsu could protest further. Finding Ida wasn't hard. Izuku's assassin instincts guided him through the chaos of the city until he found the alley where Ida lay wounded at the feet of the hero killer, Stain. Izuku narrowed his eyes, crouching low as he observed the scene. Stain was talking, his words filled with conviction about true heroes and false ones. He drew his anti-sensei knife, feeling its weight in his hand. He leapt from the shadows, aiming for Stain's heart. Stain reacted immediately, his sword clashing with Izuku's knife in a metallic screech. The impact sent a jolt up Izuku's arm, the force of the hero killer's strike surprising him. They exchanged blows, each movement calculated, each strike precise. But Izuku could feel it for the first time in years, he was being pushed back. Stain was relentless, his speed and strength on par with what Izuku had faced during his assassination days. The hero killer's bloodlust was palpable, and Izuku could feel the pull of his old instincts, the cold calculation he'd buried when he left 3E. Stain smirked, eyes gleaming with dark amusement. You've got potential, kid. But you're not a hero. You're something else. I can smell it on you. Izuku gritted his teeth, refusing to be baited. He lunged forward, only for Stain to parry and knock him back. His body ached from the blows, but he refused to give up. He couldn't. Suddenly, a sharp whistle pierced the air. Stain turned, his eyes narrowing as three figures emerged from the shadows. Karasuma, Nagisa, and Karma. Izuku's heart leapt into his throat as his 3E family appeared, their eyes sharp and determined. Izuku, Karasuma said calmly, stepping forward. Stand down. Stain's grin faltered, his gaze shifting between the newcomers and Izuku. Who the hell are they? His family, Karma said with a smirk, flipping a knife in his hand. The fight resumed, but this time, Izuku was no longer alone. Stain was formidable, but Karasuma's speed and Nagisa's cunning were more than a match for him. Izuku fought alongside them, the four of them moving in perfect sync, just like old times. As Stain faltered, Karasuma moved in for the final blow, disarming him with a swift strike. But before he could finish the job, another person jumped down into the alley. It was Aizawa. Karasuma and Aizawa locked eyes, tension crackling between them. Without a word, Karasuma gestured to Izuku. We're leaving, Karasuma said firmly. He's coming with us. Aizawa's eyes narrowed, his voice low. Over my dead body. The fight between the two men was fierce, Aizawa's scarf whipping through the air as he tried to restrain the older man. But Karasuma was faster and was well used to fighting without a quirk, something that Aizawa relied upon for the shock value. Izuku felt like he couldn't move as his dad and Aizawa dueled. He could see that though his dad had the upper hand, a long fight wasn't something that they wanted. He had to do something. He lunged forward, slashing at Aizawa with his anti-sensei knife as he threw two others with pinpoint accuracy. The two he threw pinned Aizawa to the alley floor. Izuku, what are you doing? Let's go, Dad. He said simply, and all three of them took to the roofs, free running until he could no longer hear the sirens. Hizashi had warned him. It was part of why he'd put a tracker sewn into Izuku's costume just before they were supposed to go together to Izuku's internship. Aizawa wanted to trust that Izuku would make the right choice, and that he would get to show the kid that he was sorry, but he hadn't thought he was wrong. He had been a teacher for a long time, and every student he'd ever expelled had eventually learned the lesson that they needed to be better heroes. He even set it up during his first year as a teacher that any student he expelled did not get a black mark on their record like they would if they were truly expelled, rather his expulsions were on paper and only seen by Nedzu, himself and the student in question. He didn't want to ruin their future, even though he wasn't that sadistic no matter what the students and other teachers believed. No, rather he liked to believe that he was the harsh taskmaster, the goalkeeper, the referee that would pull the kids from play and throw them in timeout until they weren't self-sacrificing idiots like Oboro or were in it for the fame like All Might, or worse only in it to beat up on weak people with villainous quirks like Sensoji or Endeavor. Whichever type of student, the self-sacrificing, the fame-seekers, or the bullies, he knew his system worked. Of the 20 kids he'd expelled from last year's class, 8 had been directly expelled for trying to attack a classmate, and the other 12 were put into Gen Ed with his husband. He'd even had 3 of them come to him after they got into 2, as heroics program to thank him. Those 3 had ended up being the big 3 for that year. So he knew the system worked. But Izuku had always been different. He'd been interested from the beginning, watching the boy's impressive skills as he easily fell robot after robot. The only thing he had not been fond of was seeing that Izuku had a very strong, very flashy quirk that he only used once in the whole exam. That either indicated that the applicant was overly confident in their quirk or they were underconfident in it. Then during the assessment when Izuku had pulled his knife on another applicant, he knew he had to keep an eye on the kid. There was something dark in the kid. And then it came out that the kid had been trained by someone who had trained a whole class of vulnerable kids into assassins. He'd seen some horrible things as an underground hero, and logically he knew that the kids under UA's care could almost be called child soldiers. But he did care about them. He did. So hearing that one of his had been trained to kill and that there were more out there like Izuku, scared him. Made him rethink things. He'd reacted poorly and caused Izuku to doubt his place in the heroics program. He hadn't caught how Izuku was planning something as he fell asleep at Gran Torino's. When the Nomu had hit the train, he'd told Izuku to remain. But as soon as he saw the Nomu was dealt with thanks to Endeavor, he checked Izuku's tracker, and yes, there it was, moving towards an alleyway. He should have known. He should have listened to Hizashi and reached out, and now one of his was heading for a situation that he wasn't sure Izuku was prepared for. The kid was good, moving with grace, and had a precision that he wished some of his kids had with knives and firearms. But was he good enough to go toe-to-toe with the hero killer while he was in the headspace of, I have to prove I belong in the hero course? It would be all his fault again if Izuku died because he was trying to prove himself. It would be all his fault and he knew he wouldn't be able to stand that. Not again. So he moved, as fast as possible, praying for what was only the second time in his life that he wouldn't be too late. The hero killer was on the ropes when he jumped down to help. He locked eyes with the man, who looked almost as tired as Tsukachi on a good day. We're leaving. The man said firmly, he's coming with us. Over my dead body. He answered firmly. The fight between them was fierce. He whipped his scarf through the air, trying to restrain the man. But the man was faster and didn't even seem to flinch as he turned his quirk on him. He was further caught off guard when Izuku slashed out with his knife, and then when he jumped back he was suddenly pinned by 2 more knives thrown with pinpoint accuracy. Izuku, what are you doing? He tried asking. Let's go, Dad, was all he heard before the man, Izuku, and the other kids he'd seen with the man had disappeared. He just barely had the energy to pull himself from the knives pinning him to the alley, and wrap Stain in his capture scarf before backup arrived. Things moved quickly from there. Stain was taken into custody, and Nedzu let all of the students know that they would not be finishing their internships. Izuku must have found the tracker he'd put on him, or that man, the one that could only be the Karasuma sensei Izuku had been looking for, had found it. It meant that he had lost a student. But he hadn't just lost a student. He'd almost permanently lost another. He should have seen the signs with Ida when he'd seen the internship form. He'd assumed Ida was genuine in his desire to see where his brother patrolled and that the rule-following boy would continue to be rule-following. He'd underestimated his class. Luckily or unluckily as it may be, Izuku's intervention had saved Ida's life, and he didn't have too many injuries that he had to stay in the hospital. It was the one bright spot in the whole mess. Although now he had to tell the class that he'd lost one of their own. Class, I have some bad news. He looked at them all. Thankfully they were all paying close attention. Izuku Midoriya has been taken while on his internship. We know who took him, but not where. Good riddance to that quirkless freak. Should have kicked him out when he threatened me with that knife of his. He turned, quirk flaring. Bakugo, head to the principal's office. I want to know exactly why you think a quirkless freak should have been expelled. Because he's quirkless. Don't know how he cheated, don't care. The freak was always quirkless. It's your fault for letting him think that he could be a hero and now he's gotten himself taken. If he'd listened to me when he should have and taken that swan leap off of a building, this never would have happened. Bakugo, I've changed my mind. Pack your things and go. You're expelled. You can't expel me. I'm going to be the next #1 hero. He activated his quirk a second before his former student could, stopping the sparks before they appeared. Do you want to add attacking a pro hero to your expulsion, brat? Get moving. You'll be sorry. I'm the best. I have the best quirk. He glares at the brat, and when Bakugo makes no move to start moving, he grabs the set of quirk suppression cuffs he always keeps under his desk and slaps them on the kid. Then he calls for the security bots to remove him. Then he calls his husband to come take over his class. He needs to talk to Nedzu for 2 reasons now. First, to talk about the expulsion, and second, to talk about Izuku. He's not looking forward to the conversation. Tashinori had thought when he passed on his quirk to Midoriya Izuku that he would not face the terror of losing his successor. After all, the worst villain he'd ever faced had died by his hand, or so he'd thought. And Midoriya was the best choice for successor. After all, the boy had been the reason he'd realized he'd lost his connection to his roots. Lost what made him feel like a hero. But then that same bright, happy, fanboy had shown up at the assessment test brandishing knives and only used one for all once. That same bright, happy fanboy had shown that there was a darkness within him, a killing intent so intense that he feared for the student Izuku had drawn one of his knives on. He despaired, thinking he'd made a mistake, thinking that he'd have to fight the boy he'd begun to see as sort of a son. And then the sports festival had happened and he'd seen that rather than a monster on a short leash, Izuku was merely a different sort of hero than what he'd seen in the beginning. He'd seen Izuku hold back from hurting his classmates. He saw, just for a moment, that same happy, bright boy buried deep under the cold facade. He felt amazed that Izuku had offered him one for all back with no hesitation, explaining that Izuku knew he was uncomfortable. Izuku explained how he was not a killer, but he was an assassin, and if that made him uncomfortable, he'd give the quirk back if only he'd promise not to shatter that next person's dreams. He'd felt ashamed then as he closed his fist around Izuku's and insisted Izuku keep one for all. He'd meant every word he'd said to Izuku. Of course, his successor's skills still left him feeling uncomfortable. Of course, he felt like he lost the boy he had trained for those 6 months. But none of that mattered. To him, Izuku was still his successor whether he liked the assassin's training or not. He'd learned to accept Izuku for what he was, not what he wanted Izuku to be. And then he hears it from Nezu. His boy, his successor has been taken. Taken by the man who trained him to be an assassin. He despairs as he wonders how he's going to explain things to Izuku's mother. Has anyone told Izuku's mother anything? Does she know that Izuku trained with him? Probably not. Because he'd taken that from Izuku. He'd insisted that Izuku not tell a soul about their training. It's his fault that Izuku has been taken. If he'd explained things to Izuku's mother, perhaps she would have insisted she should be there as well for the training as was her right, and then Izuku would have never been taken the first time by whoever had taken him the first time and he'd never have been forced to learn those deadly skills. He wants to rant and rage. He wants to hit something. He wants to be out searching for Izuku so he can tell him that he'll still support him, UA student or not. What he gets is Aizawa. You need something to hit? He says resignedly, hit me. I deserve it. I pushed him away when he needed me most. I pushed and I pushed because I have 18 other students that I have to think about and I didn't think about how I'm not helping any of them the way I think I am. 18? I expelled Bakugo Katsuki and Mineta Minoru. Bakugo said some pretty nasty things about Izuku. About him being a quirkless freak and that he should have taken his advice and jumped from a building instead of coming to hero school. Said it was my fault for coddling him. For letting him stay after he threatened another student. So, you want to hit something? I'm volunteering. We both know that won't fix the problem. Though it might make me feel better temporarily, I share just as much guilt as you do. I knew Izuku, before the exam you know. He thought he was quirkless, but I recognized the same signs of a stockpiling quirk in him as were in me. You were quirkless? Thought to be so until my 14th birthday. Then I buffed up. Found out my quirk required muscle mass to work properly and that was why everyone thought I was quirkless. People weren't kind to quirkless people even when I was a kid. I get the feeling I don't want to know and I kind of do want to know how a quirkless kid would be treated nowadays. I have to admit, I was scared when I saw Izuku pull that knife on Bakugo. I felt that killing intent and wondered if I'd made a mistake. But I realized Izuku wasn't the person I thought he was and let go of that preconceived notion of him. I thought that it was helping us to get back to a relationship close to what we had. But maybe I was wrong about that too. Maybe I need to let go of Izuku and take responsibility for my actions. Maybe all I can do is do better for the students who remain. Maybe that's all we can do. Be better. Maybe someday we'll meet again on the field and I can tell him how wrong I was. Who knows? Now, do you still want to punch something? 'Cause I feel like all this mushy sheet calls for either a drink or a few rounds in the ring. I can't drink. Work injury. Well then, let's head to the gym. He smiles for the first time since he heard that Izuku was taken. Both of them are at fault for what they did to Izuku, and both of them will share guilt until either Izuku is found, or if Izuku is never found. Whatever comes in the future, he makes a vow that he will be the hero that is needed. No more half-butting things. They say that hindsight is 20/20, and Aizawa Shouta can say with absolute certainty that in heroics, it's more like 100 looking back on all the mistakes he's made as a hero and as a teacher with a clarity he hadn't had before. He can see where his bitterness over Oboro's death had hardened him into a man who was killing the dreams of many a hero hopeful. He hadn't wanted to admit that what he was doing was punishing kids who could have had a future for mistakes that they hadn't made yet. He was showing the exact prejudice he'd always been shown in school for having a villainous quirk. He might as well have been shoving a knife into those kids' backs for all the damage he'd done. He's finding out, almost too late after the whole debacle with Izuku, that his method for teaching had caused 2 suicide attempts, over a dozen kids to go villain, and a dozen more to end up as mere sidekicks when they could have been great if only he'd given them a chance. Then there was his hell class from this year. He'd f'd up with all of them. He'd been so focused on what he thought worked he hadn't noticed or particularly cared how screwed up they all were until it was shoved into his face after Izuku had been taken from his internship. For example, Mineta had been sexually harassing every female or female-presenting student since he'd walked through the doors of UA, even going so far as to grope his classmates multiple times during emergencies, and he hadn't done a thing until looking at the reports the girls had filed with his husband, because they hadn't trusted him to take care of it. Poor Kaminari was scheduled for retraining because he hadn't bothered to look at the kid's file to see that the idiot court counselor for Kaminari had insisted the kid amp up his electrical charge, causing him to go into way mode constantly until the kid had what amounted to brain damage. Kaminari would still make a good hero. He'd ensured it by taking him to the support department and giving him a proper outlet for his electrical charges. Now the kid could be both an electrical stun grenade EMP and a taser without issue. He could have had a competent hero student well used to his useful quirk if he hadn't written Kaminari off as a moron with almost no potential. He'd even had Kaminari on his shortlist for expulsion after the internships, and all it had taken to take Kaminari from moron to great had been one visit to the support department. Something Kaminari might not have been so reluctant to do if he'd mentioned it at all on the first day, like he was supposed to, instead of skipping the boring orientation for his quirk assessment test. But he thinks his greatest F up, besides ignoring how half his class has quirk issues that he hadn't bothered looking in their files to read up on, was how poorly he'd treated Izuku, Bakugo, and Ida's problems. He'd looked at Bakugo those first few days and seen someone who reminded him of Sensoji or Endeavor. A big fish in a small pond who'd been told their whole life that their quirk was heroic and never had to face consequences for his actions. But he'd kept Bakugo even after the kid had almost brought down a building during the battle trials because he was certain that he could temper the kid into a better hero, just like Sensoji had eventually. He'd pushed aside the fact that Bakugo was rude to all his classmates because, like he'd said in the beginning, they weren't here to make friends. They were here to become heroes. He ignored that Bakugo had screwed them over at the USJ by attacking Kurojiiri because he hadn't been there. He hadn't known because he hadn't bothered to look at the after-action reports. He'd been too busy trying to get through to Izuku. Looking at them had his blood boiling. While what Bakugo had done had bought them time, if Bakugo hadn't been such an but as to ignore a direct order from 13 might not have been injured. 13 might have been able to SCK up Kurojiiri. Finding out that Bakugo wasn't just an angry entitled a-hole, but one who would ignore orders and would attack even if it endangered allies on the field, and then finding out that same kid had an attitude of quirkless or worthless had him seeing red. Well, now Bakugo wasn't his problem anymore. As for Ida, he should have seen the little brother of one of his friend group had been off after his older brother had been attacked by the hero killer. He should have seen when Ida had insisted upon manual for a mentor that Ida was planning something. But he'd pushed it aside because he wasn't a parent. He wasn't his class's parent. He'd ignored it for so long that the duty of a homeroom teacher was to be a guiding force, a substitute for when their parents would be away. He'd been more like the uncaring adults he'd always hated when he'd been small. It had almost led to Ida's death. Would Tenya have felt more comfortable coming to him to talk about his issues if he hadn't positioned himself as the standoffish prick that he was pretty sure they thought hated them? Would Tenya have had more people to confide in if he hadn't insisted on the stupid, "you aren't here to make friends" attitude? He'd never know. Izuku was a whole can of worms he hadn't wanted to touch with a 10-foot pole. If he had been better from the beginning, if he would have been the support his class needed, he wonders if Izuku would have confessed from the beginning that he was an assassin. He wonders if he would have been the listening ear his class needed instead of the disciplinarian and a-hole, if Izuku would have come to trust him, and may not have walked off with his abuser. He'd found a good partner for wanting to kick his butt in All Might. All Might who'd lost a kid just like he'd lost a kid all because he couldn't stop being in but for 5 FING minutes and do his actual job. At least, he learned that All Might knew how to hold back, but was also a good sparring buddy. He thinks he kinda actually likes the other man a little better now that he sees beyond the mask of the idiot limelighter that had even him fooled. Now, all he had to do was keep moving forward, keep being better for his leftover class, whatever that would mean besides the therapy he was getting now, and going for a few rounds with All Might whenever he felt he needed another butt kicking. So he started with actually telling his remaining students what their final exam was going to be instead of leaving it to be a logical ruse, like he had been tempted to do because he wanted them to start trusting him. The trust had to start with honesty. Then, after informing the class exactly what they'd be facing, he scked up his usual cantankerous want to sleep and instead cut back hours of patrol to offer after-school training. After-school training revealed Yaoyorozu still felt uncomfortable in her costume but didn't want to say anything because she was scared it would get her expelled for complaining about something so minor, and he also found out that Hagakure had been running around naked the whole time, that he'd let a minor run around naked when she could be hurt so easily, been dead so quickly because she didn't have protection. That caused a round of costume changes for almost all of the kids. But it also led to them talking to him more. It was slow going, he was having to learn a whole different teaching style while considering if he wanted to fill the 3 empty spots in his class. He kind of did, because he had his eyes on Shinso from the sports tournament to fill Bakugo's spot. But he kind of didn't, at least not yet. He'd been swung to the "not yet" by his husband, who pointed out that the kids needed to have a little more time to adjust to being a proper class before throwing that balance into chaos. He'd think about it after the summer camp. And then that camp had been attacked. His kids were being attacked and all he could think about was how he was going to fail them again, and this time it was because they'd all passed their exams. His kids were all out in the forest, as was Koda. Kota wasn't one of his kids but was a small kid all the same. A small kid, all alone in the forest because he didn't trust heroes. Everything was going to shit and once again he wasn't going to be enough. He pushes himself past the self-recrimination, past everything to get out there, to look for his kids and get them to safety. He almost comes to a stop when a strange redhead stands in front of him, with a struggling Kota in his arms. "You must be Eraserhead? Who are you?" "Your backup," he says simply as he pushes Kota into the cabin, and then stands in front of the cabin, twirling a familiar-looking knife in his hands. Looking at the redhead in the low light, he notices the 3E stitched onto the sleeve, and he remembers this particular redhead being at the battle between Stain and Izuku. He wants to ask the questions that are burning in him. He hears gunshots in the distance, and for a moment wonders if it is Snipe, but he hadn't invited Snipe or any of the other teachers even knowing that the League of Villains was after them. So it had to be someone else. He had to know what was happening with his kids. "Will you watch him? I need to get out there. My kids." "Ah. Izuku said you were like Dad. I'm not going to be able to convince you to stay, am I?" "No." He watches as the redhead pulls a cell phone from his pocket. "Ritsu, can you send Manami over to watch the kid?" "Getting bored already, Karma? Should have known." "Yeah, Manami doesn't have access to any of her chemicals here yet. She was Chiba's backup, but she might be a better choice to be here." It only takes a few seconds before he sees her, another kid in a 3E uniform. He is torn between staying with what is possibly another assassin to protect Kota and going after his kids. He has to believe that if Izuku is good, even if he's an assassin, then these kids are good too. He doesn't waste another second running out. He sees more of the kids in the same uniform helping members of Class 1A and 1B by carrying them to the lodge. He doesn't stop them. He merely notes which ones as he passes by, ticking off names from his class list. He doesn't know the kids from 1B as well as he does his own, but from the count, the only ones missing now are Todoroki and Tokoyami. His breath is labored as he runs through the dense forest, scanning every direction for signs of his kids. He finds Tokoyami first, consumed by dark shadow, the monstrous manifestation roaring in uncontrollable rage. "Damn it, Tokoyami!" Aizawa snarls, activating his quirk to force the shadow back into SBMSN. The moment the darkness begins to recede, a silver-haired boy appears from the shadows, another kid in that same 3E uniform. He's carrying a tranquilizer gun, the weapon raised but never fired. "Thought you might need a hand," the boy says, lowering the gun with a calm that unsettles Aizawa. "I don't need help," Aizawa starts, but the boy cuts him off with a slight smirk. "Not the first teacher who said that." Aizawa clenches his teeth but doesn't waste time arguing. He grabs Tokoyami by the collar and drags him toward the lodge, the 3E kid trailing just behind. For all the chaos happening around them, the boy seems eerily calm, as if he's done this 1,000 times before. Aizawa doesn't have time to wonder what that says about these kids. When they reach the edge of the forest, another figure steps into view, this one tall and carrying Shoji over his shoulder. A sharp-eyed girl follows behind with precision in every step, hands resting lightly on an assortment of strange-looking blades tucked into her belt. "Found this guy caught in some vines," the taller boy says casually, lowering Shoji onto the ground. Before Aizawa can thank or question them, their cell phones all start going off. Izuku's in trouble. He moves with the others, noticing that they move a lot like underground heroes do, although he's not seen a whole class of students who can free run through the trees as quickly as they do. He pushes it to the back of his mind. That isn't important. He just has to get to Izuku. He comes to a clearing and sees Izuku, his eyes wild as he stands over a man, the same man he remembers Izuku walking off with during the showdown with Stain. He arrives just in time to see Izuku being turned into a marble. He tries to chase, but surprisingly the strange man grabs his arm. "It's part of our plan." "Ritsu, is the tracker engaged?" "Engaged and ready, Dad." "Then all that's left is to talk to your boss. We are going to need your help for when this is finished." He stares at the man, his paranoid side says he can't trust this man. But his other side, the one that wants to fix things, knows that if he doesn't do things their way, they'll do whatever it is they have planned without help, and as good as he knows they are, he doesn't know what they are facing. They need the help. He won't fail again. He can work with them, even if he doesn't like them. When Izuku had first fallen into the strange world with the half-destroyed moon, into the unfamiliar classroom surrounded by classmates without quirks just like him, he couldn't help but wonder what had sent him here. At first, he'd assumed someone had used their quirk on him. The kids at his school didn't care much about using their quirks on him, and it wouldn't have been a stretch to think that one of them had a quirk he couldn't remember. As much as he hated Katsuki for everything he had become, he had to admit the blonde had a point. His classmates felt like extras in a movie. He barely knew their names, and he paid little attention to the quirks used around him, though that didn't mean either he or they knew the full extent of their abilities. A snarky, bitter voice in his head, one that sounded all too much like the Katsuki he used to know, would say that it was just like useless Deku to get hit with a quirk he couldn't even remember and end up in some alternate dimension. For a moment, he almost wished Katsuki were here with him. Katsuki was brave, not like the crybaby Izuku. Katsuki was smart, not like the fool Izuku had always felt he was, the one who couldn't seem to do anything right. A small part of him, the part that had once looked up to heroes, wondered where the hell they were. Why hadn't anyone noticed he was gone? Then he remembered the truth he'd always known but had pushed aside. He was quirkless. The police didn't care about quirkless people. Even All Might had never cared. He'd crushed Izuku's dream in an instant, tossing it aside without even a second thought. All Might hadn't changed his mind until Izuku had once again done something reckless, rushing in to save Katsuki. Even then, All Might had only said Izuku could be a hero if he had All Might's quirk. He'd never believed Izuku could be a hero on his own. To the world, to everyone, Izuku was just another useless quirkless boy. Another, quieter part of him wondered if this whole situation could somehow be connected to his own quirk. That night he'd swallowed All Might's hair, he'd felt different. He couldn't explain what it was, just that something had shifted, some pull in his mind and body that made him feel other, as if he'd been connected to a force greater than he could understand. Dimensional travel quirks were supposed to be impossible, yet there he had been, staring at the evidence in the sky, the shattered moon. He'd tried everything, imagining home, imagining his mom's katsudon on the table, reaching out with an invisible hand. But none of it worked. If he'd had a quirk before All Might's, it was either too subtle or too complicated for him to grasp. So, he pushed it aside, focusing on what was in front of him. In time, he learned skills he hadn't known he had. He laughed with his new classmates, learned what it meant to be part of a family, and when the time came to stand in front of Takoka, he used All Might's quirk for the first time to protect them, even though it broke his arm. Koro Sensei and Karasuma Sensei had both given him advice on how to use his power, and for a while, he had hope. He could feel the ocean of power inside him, the vast, terrifying energy of All Might's quirk, but there was something else, too. A smaller, faint trickle, something that felt like his own, though he couldn't fully control it. The most he could do was touch it, feel it pulse through his body in a loop, though it was still too weak to use in any meaningful way. Neither Koro Sensei nor Karasuma allowed him to push it further, and with the pressure of completing the mission weighing on them, Izuku focused on sharpening his assassination skills. They were more practical than All Might's quirk or whatever quirk he had, especially since it wouldn't help him return home. When their mission was finally complete, and he felt his quirk activate again, Izuku fought against the pull. He didn't want to go back. He wanted to stay with his family, with the people who had become his new world. But when had life ever been fair to him? He returned, only to find that a year had passed in that world, while not a single day had passed in his own. He asked himself what Koro Sensei would want for him. The answer was simple: Koro Sensei would want him to keep reaching for his dream. It was almost laughable. His dream had always been about heroism, about proving he wasn't the useless Deku everyone saw him as. But now? Now, he wasn't sure he even wanted that dream anymore. Out of spite, more than anything, he showed up for the exam. He had shown Katsuki he wasn't the same spineless, powerless Deku he had once been. But it all felt hollow. He hoped that by attending hero school, he would either figure out how to use his quirk to return to his family, or at least continue pretending to be the happy hero, despite the gnawing emptiness inside. Then, during Hosu, his dad had appeared. And all Izuku could think was thank FING God. The reunion had sparked new hope, and for a moment, he considered using his quirk to take them all back to their world. But that power was still blocked, just as it had been before. Even Nagisa, who had used a little of Izuku's leftover power along with some of Koro Sensei's to get them to his world, couldn't unlock it. It felt almost as if it were intentionally sealed. So, Izuku made plans once again. If they were going to be stuck in his world, they had to clean up the mess. They needed to take out the biggest threat and seal their reputation. Once they did that, they could pursue their dreams. It didn't take long for Ritsu to find information on Shigaraki, the villain responsible for the USJ incident. Izuku couldn't help but feel bitter that the heroes hadn't tracked him down sooner, especially after the public surveillance footage clearly showed Shigaraki entering and leaving a bar multiple times before and after the USJ incident. Using that, Karma had placed a listening device on Dabi, one of Shigaraki's followers, and discovered that the League of Villains planned to attack the summer camp Izuku would have attended. From there, the plan had fallen into place. Shigaraki was a threat, but he wasn't the biggest one. Whoever had created the Reaper Izuku had slain was the real danger. I really hate the idea of you being taken. I know, Dad. But one of two things will happen. Either whatever is blocking me from using my original quirk will disappear, and we end up back home, or we take out the biggest threat here, and we make our own future. You've got the paralytic? 3 different kinds. That's my boy. The rest didn't matter. The whys, the hows, none of it mattered anymore. Izuku knew that whatever happened next, he was staying with his family. He would make sure of it. Nezu didn't truly understand human emotions. It was impossible for him as an animal to do so. It didn't mean that he didn't feel them, or that they weren't boosted by his animal instincts no matter how much he suppressed them, because animal instinct tended to freak humans out. Animals didn't have the same concepts of ownership, but what animals did feel was fierce protectiveness towards their young, and a need for pack companionship. When he'd fought so hard for his rights as a quirked animal, Nezu had fought with the intended result of, I am a person even if I'm also an animal, but he'd also fought for the chance to get his education so that he could be in charge of educating the new generations, so that they would see every person deserve to be treated equally, and so that he could have the companionship he so craved. Because the children who walked his walls were all his kits as he saw it. It didn't matter if those kits grew up and away and started nests of their own, for all animals tended to do so at one point. Somewhere along the line he'd forgotten that he needed to let his kits go, especially when those kits caught his attention. It was a blessing and a curse of being an animal with a quirk. Because instinct told him to keep the kits he cherished close, his quirk said keep them close because they were interesting, and his heart said keep them close because there were so very few kits that could stand being around him when he forgot to rein in his animal traits. Aizawa Shouta had been the first of the kits passing through his school that had appealed to all parts of himself. Aizawa appealed to the animal side, who recognized a hurt, abandoned pup and had latched on with a feeling of mine like he'd never felt before. It was part of why he allowed the man to run his class how he felt when he became a teacher. Midoriya Izuku had been the second. For he'd recognized a predator when he saw one, and yet instead of chasing that predator from his nest at the first opportunity, he'd allowed his quirk's curiosity to override that instinct. The 2 parts of himself warred as he watched the only human he'd ever even privately thought of as his got closer and yet further from Izuku, as Izuku himself seemed to switch between getting closer and pushing them away. In all the chaos of learning, there was a whole class of kits out there like Izuku. He'd forgotten that everyone deserves a chance, and he'd remembered the predator, and like the animal he was, he lashed out. Not with claws or biting or marking territory, but with psychological tricks, just like the scientists had done to him so long ago. He'd been horrified when Izuku had snapped because he realized exactly what he'd done. He'd pushed both the only human he could tolerate as his to the brink by forcing him to break Izuku's trust, and he'd pushed Izuku right back into the arms of the very person that had trained him. That person who he'd thought only of condemning even as he didn't know them or their motives. That person he'd decided was not worthy of one of his kits when he did the exact same thing. He'd been a complete and utter hypocrite, and it had lost him one of his most talented kits. Sitting across from the man he'd thought he would hate, realizing he'd screwed up, he sees that the rather tired-looking man was just like him, although judging from the protective detail of kits that had followed to their meeting, this man was the better person. He could admit when he was wrong, he could admit when he'd been beaten, and though it would hurt, he could admit when one of his kits needed to leave the nest for another. It would help if Aizawa would stop glaring at the man though. He understood the need to bare one's fangs at an interloper in his nest, especially one who'd taken one of his kits, but he also understood that fighting this man would solve nothing. So, you are Karasuma then? I am. Why'd you let Izuku be taken? And he was truly confused on that point. He could sense the man was as much a father as Izuku had claimed with the name, Class Dad, so why would he allow one of his children to be taken without a fight? It's my son's plan, he growled, putting emphasis on the word son, showing that indeed the man thought of Izuku as his own. When he realized what his quirk did, he planned this. The rest was just finding the material. After it's all said and done is another matter. That's where I come in. The way I see it, your world is in stagnation, same as ours was. Shitty government officials getting away with allowing people to be heroes only if they're licensed, as if that can truly help the people. No, your world needs some fresh blood, some fresh ideas, and some people that aren't afraid of getting their hands dirty to make those changes happen. If you cooperate, I can offer my own services as a former government agent that knows how to get around the system, as well as my services as a professional trainer. I can also offer the services of my partner Irina as an experienced honeypot assassin. If you chose not to cooperate, that is fine as well. We don't need you, but my son has pointed out that we will need identification as well as a proper place to work. And perhaps a school as well. Had heard Izuku's implication that where he'd been was another world, but he'd never truly believed it. He'd thought it was brainwashing. But that AI who'd broken through his firewalls like they were paper made him suspect, because other than a quirk, no AI was that sophisticated. He sighed. If he didn't make this concession, he'd lose out and never see Izuku or this man again. If he does, he loses only his pride and he'll face intense scrutiny from every single hero in his school, as he should. He hates that it amounts to a lose-lose proposition, but he'd rather have these people in his good graces than not. So he reaches out a paw and hopes for the best. Izuku had suspected many things about his original quirk. Things like karma, or luck, or even that tracks came to mind. Because why else would he have to suffer for so many years, never knowing he had a quirk of his own, if that quirk wasn't some sort of godlike amusement in the form of a shounen manga or like those weird English soap operas his dad had pretended he didn't watch before he'd vanished from their lives even before the fated diagnosis. It had taken falling back into his original world just as he was starting to be happy, just as he was accepting parts of himself he repressed because anger had never helped him, jealousy had never helped him, even love or as close to it as his mother couldn't help him. It had taken falling back into his own world and losing the people he cared about to understand what his quirk did. One for All is also at fault though. Because his quirk hadn't been strong enough before being boosted to do what it was meant to do. He thinks that it's the one thing he's grateful for. That One for All allowed him to find his true family. But he'd also been so very lonely when he'd fallen back into his world, and with the loss of the people he'd cared about he'd fallen into the habit of what felt familiar. Going to UA to become a hero, because what else was he supposed to do? Break down and cry? That hadn't helped him before, it would never help. The other thing he'd done was an analysis of his quirk. He thought about everything he'd felt the night he'd vanished. Every feeling as he reached for that same quirk only for it to deny his desire. He hated that his quirk only served its purpose when it wanted to. And he hated that he had a very good idea of when his quirk would be useful again. And then his dad had appeared. His family was back with him. But his quirk still wouldn't do what he wanted it to do. It would not take them back to their world. He thinks he knows why. Planning what to do about that information is so much easier with Ritsu and his siblings all together again. Ritsu hacks servers until she finds the information that will allow them to finish things. Nagisa sneaks the tracking chip onto the buses that are leaving for summer training camp. It's all lead to this point. To All for One. He could have done without the man's psychotic follower throwing him into a marble. He could have done without the strange blonde taking all of his knives except his anti-sensei one. That one they'd never find. He definitely could have done without standing in front of the oddly familiar potato-faced man. All Might chose a fool. All Might chose the only person who can defeat you. They have all said that. That their successor would win where they could not. If 8 of them could not, why would I expect the 9th to be any different? He had to hold in the urge to run, to hide, to get back to the weapons that he can use to end this man. Because that isn't the plan. So he waits, and doesn't twist from the warp user's grasp as All for One comes closer. He doesn't flinch when the familiar scent of that cologne clues him into who All for One had been posing as. The information isn't important. This man had to go, no matter their original connection. He waits until the man has his hand on his head, and he waits still. He had to wait for his quirk to be taken. The plan demands it. He doesn't scream as phantom hands grasp at his whole being. He doesn't flinch nor have the energy to scream because he needs to focus. He needs to focus on One for All and allowing it to be taken. Because if he doesn't, then the plan will not work. He ignores the ache in his chest as the warmth leaves, as the villain cackles as he's won. All he concentrates on is the familiar knife in his hand, the one he'd hidden in his hair, as he slowly slides out of the warp user's grasp. He ignores everything except slamming that knife, coated in quirk-canceling material into the man's leg and watching as his quirk, the quirk that had been stolen, does what it was born to do. Goodbye Hisashi. He says as he watches his SPRM donor vanish. He spends the next few minutes as the warp user is stunned to find a back entrance, walk out, and call his dad. It's done. Aizawa had never thought he'd be a good teacher, and after everything that happened with Izuku, and going through everything he'd done since becoming a teacher, he'd realized that he'd effed up royally. One of the first things he'd done after it was confirmed that Izuku was okay, and that the man named Karasuma was if nothing else a much better teacher than he'd ever be, he went on a long apology tour, offering re-enrollment to those kids he'd failed out of his class that ended up going vigilante, offering plea deals to the ones who'd turned villain and visiting the graves of 5 who'd taken their own lives. Those had been the worst, he had thought, until he'd had tracked down their families and had to beg forgiveness from each one. Strangely enough, even the families of the ones who had died hadn't been mad. Sad, yes, but not mad. After the apology tour he'd tried to turn in his resignation from teaching at UA, only for Izuku to offer a different punishment. Teaching at the Koro Sensei School of Heroics. He'd turned up for the interview at Nedzu's insistence, surprised when a little girl with silver hair and a unicorn horn was sitting at the welcome desk. She didn't look older than 6. "Excuse me, I'm here to see Izuku?" The little girl squeaked adorably, and ducked under the table, and a different, light blue-haired androgynous person took their place. They looked him up and down, as if assessing his competence, and then they threw a knife at him. He caught it, and activated his quirk on reflex, startled when that person didn't even flinch before tackling him to the ground. Not wanting to hurt a civilian, but also knowing someone was attacking him, he kneed them and rolled out from under them, before whipping out his capture weapon, trapping their arms against their side. "Nagisa. Aizawa. That's enough." He didn't even notice until someone was guiding him to a bench that there was a knife sticking out of his upper thigh. "I can see why you wanted him to come be an instructor, Izuku. He really does move a lot like Dad." "Sorry about that, Aizawa. Nagisa is my second in command and he wanted to see if you'd be a good fit. I'd already vouched for you, but my siblings and I trust each other's judgment. 2 heads are better at judging than 1 after all." The knife is expertly removed, his leg wrapped, and he's ushered into a small principal's office. The name on the door reads, Ritsu. "Why me?" he asks bluntly. It had been his fist question when he'd heard Izuku was looking for instructors for his new school that Nedzu had constructed just outside of UA's borders. "You're a lot like Dad. You care about your students, even if you aren't the best at emotionally connecting with them, and we need someone who will accept all peoples that want to apply. Your program would focus on the heroic side. We already have an instructor for the other side after all." HW winced. "Are you sure you can trust me? After all, I've held internal biases for a long time, biases that hurt you and many other students under my care. If you can even use that word. And what did you do once you realized what you had done? You went and fixed it. No matter that it hurt, no matter that some might not want to talk to you or see you. You did something. That's much more than any teacher ever did for me. As for the rest? Are you willing to go to therapy for your issues? Yes. Are you willing to take on any student, and if any student needs expelling you'll do it only with a second opinion unless that student is a threat to themselves or others? Yes. Then I see no issue working with you. If this is his penance for everything he's done wrong, he'll gladly pay it." He signs the contract. The call comes when he isn't expecting it, and for someone with a quirk like his, that's saying something. Sir Night Eye stands before the remnants of the Shai Hasaikai's base, now engulfed in roaring flames that lick at the night sky. The scene is surreal: children standing at the edge of the blaze, laughing and roasting marshmallows. One of them, a little girl with silver hair and a horn on her head, clutches a stick nervously, her gaze darting around. Beside her stands the green-haired boy Toshinori had told him about, the quirkless child Toshinori had chosen over Mirio. The boy who should never have had that power. Sir Night Eye's heart tightens as he steps closer. "What are you doing?" he demands, his voice cutting through the crackling of the flames. The green-haired boy looks up, his emerald eyes sharp and defiant. "Sir Night Eye." His tone is calm, but there's an edge to it, a warning. Night Eye narrows his gaze. "Thief," he spits, anger simmering just beneath his composed exterior. "If you ever truly wanted to be a hero, you'd return what you stole and turn yourself in for your crimes." The boy's expression hardens. "That's the thing, Sir Night Eye," he says, voice steady but laced with something raw. "I did want to be a hero, but heroes have too many rules that stop them from acting when it matters most. An assassin has no such restrictions. An assassin doesn't hesitate to save a child when heroes have to. So tell me, who's the real hero here?" Night Eye lunges forward, trying to grab the boy's arm, desperate to use his quirk, to see his future. But the boy is faster, ducking under his grasp and pulling a knife from his pocket. Before Night Eye can react, a red-haired boy steps out of the shadows, grinning. "Come on, bro, little sis needs to go home." His voice is casual, but his posture screams danger. In the blink of an eye, they're gone. All of them. The green-haired boy, the silver-haired girl, and the others vanish into the darkness, leaving behind only the crackling fire and the scent of burnt wood. Hours later, standing amidst the charred ruins of the laboratory, Night Eye examines the remnants with a sinking heart. The destruction is total. Whatever horrors had occurred here are gone, wiped away by the flames. And yet, as much as he wants to condemn the boy for what he's done, he can't deny the truth staring him in the face. The little girl wouldn't have lasted much longer. Not here. Still, anger churns in his chest. One for all is not meant for this. Mirio would have understood that. Why couldn't this boy? Toshinori Yagi stares at his phone, the words from Aizawa still echoing in his ears. He walked away with the villains. Voluntarily. His heart aches with doubt, guilt twisting his insides. Had he chosen wrong? Not because Izuku was an assassin, no, that wasn't it. It was because Izuku seemed hellbent on a path that would destroy him. A suicide mission to take down All for One. Toshinori wonders, if he hadn't chosen Izuku, would the boy have been safe? Would he still be that bright, eager child with a heart too big for his own good? He doesn't know. All he knows is that somewhere out there, Izuku is fighting a battle that should never have been his. And then he feels it. The last remnants of power slipped away from his body. A cold dread washes over him. Izuku, he whispers to the empty room. What have I done? His phone buzzes, breaking the silence. With trembling hands, he answers. Hello. All Might. It's done. He's gone. Relief floods him at the sound of Izuku's voice. Are you coming back? There's a pause, and then Izuku speaks, his tone soft but resolute. No. I can't. I don't belong as a hero. Some things need to be done that I can't do as a hero. And I think you know that. Toshinori's throat tightens. Will you visit sometime? Of course, All Might. There's a faint smile in the boy's voice, and it breaks Toshinori's heart. Toshinori, he says quietly. Call me Toshinori. I should have told you that from the beginning. The line goes dead, and Toshinori stares at the phone in his hand, tears streaming down his face. For the first time in years, he allows himself to cry. For his mistakes. For his successor. For the boy who had carried the weight of the world on his shoulders and walked away from it all. Because he had to. He thinks, at one point, he might have loved the little sheet or at least as close to love as he could understand from his parents. But looking back now, Katsuki realizes the Bakugo family isn't built on love. They're a toxic unit, a mess of impossible standards and misplaced priorities, with mindsets forged in fire and reinforced with steel. His mother, Bakugo Mitsuki, is a demanding woman who's always insisted he had to do his best because, as a Bakugo, perfection wasn't just expected, it was a state of being. He wonders sometimes if her obsession with perfection came from her own struggles. Before she was a Bakugo, she was just Mitsuki, the girl with the gross quirk, glycerin sweat. Sure, it made her skin baby smooth and helped her become a famous model, but he can imagine how her classmates must have treated her. Maybe that's why she pushed him so hard. Maybe she thought being perfect was the only way to survive. His father, Bakugo Masaru, is quieter, and people mistake that for weakness. They don't see the ruthless fashion designer who runs his agency with an iron fist. They don't see the meticulous man who forced his son into modeling from the time he could crawl, the man whose word could make or break careers. Masaru's models feared him, and now, Katsuki realizes, so did he. Looking back, Katsuki thinks he never stood a chance. Was it nature or nurture? Both, he decides. He was born to parents who didn't have him out of love but because it was expected. He'd figured that out at 5 years old when he asked his mother for a little brother. It seemed like a reasonable request. He'd been playing with Deku a lot back then, pretending they were brothers. He'd thought it would be nice to have a real one. But when he asked, Mitsuki's scowl cut him to pieces. You wrecked my body, she snapped. Why the F, would I wreck it again for another brat? He hadn't understood her words then, but her tone was clear enough. And when he didn't understand something, he'd explode. Literally. His quirk demanded release. The nitroglycerin coursing through his veins made sure of that. He'd needed to blow something up just to stop feeling like he was going to burst. The first time he'd used his quirk on another kid, it had been an accident. He only wanted to scare the kid away because they dared to take something that belonged to him, Deku's attention. Deku was his friend, his brother in all but blood. No one else had the right to take that away. But then Deku had stood between him and the other kid, trying to play the hero. Deku, the quirkless little sheet, had dared to step up like he could protect anyone. And all Katsuki could see was Deku in a body bag, another casualty of the world's cruelty. How dare Deku look down on him, pretending he could be something he wasn't. So Katsuki had pushed him down into the dirt with a small explosion, enough to make him cry. It had felt good at the time. Right. Power was everything, wasn't it? That's what everyone said, his teachers, his parents, society. Even All Might proved it. No one could save the day without power. But Deku kept defying him, looking down on him with those stupid, determined eyes, running around with his little notebooks, pretending he could know more about quirks than someone who actually had one. Deku's place was beneath him, wasn't it? That's what he'd told himself. That's what he'd believed. Until Deku had stopped looking down and started looking through him. That day at UA, when Deku put a knife to his throat, Katsuki didn't see the quirkless crybaby anymore. He saw a killer, someone who could back up his words with the skill to end a life. And for the first time, Katsuki felt small. He'd complained about Deku, called him unstable, insisted he needed to be locked up. But deep down, he'd known Deku was no longer the powerless kid he'd once been. And Deku kept proving it. During the battle trials, the USJ incident, the sports festival, Deku outshone him every time. And what burned the most was how Deku had done it without even using his quirk. What did that mean? What did it say about everything Katsuki had ever believed? Power was supposed to be everything, but if Deku didn't need it to win, then... During his internship, Katsuki had asked Best Jeanist about it, trying to make sense of the growing doubt eating away at him. What does it mean when someone doesn't use their powerful quirk but still does amazing things, he'd asked, trying to sound casual. Jeanist had studied him for a long moment before answering. Do you think I have a powerful quirk, Bakugo? Of course you do. You're the number 4 hero, aren't you? Jeanist sighed. When I started, I could barely manipulate a single fiber. People told me my quirk was weak and useless in battle. They said I'd never be more than a seamstress, maybe a model if I was lucky. But I didn't let that stop me. Do I deserve my position any less because I wasn't born with overwhelming power? Katsuki didn't know what to say to that. So he said nothing. But the words stayed with him, gnawing at the foundations of everything he'd built his identity on. And then Deku was gone. Aizawa wouldn't say where, only that he'd gone with someone who had been in Hosu. Deku's mom had cried for the first time he could remember, saying over and over, I should have protected him more. I tried to tell him he couldn't be a hero. Katsuki had never thought about Deku's life outside of their interactions. He'd never considered that Deku might not have anyone. That realization hit him harder than any punch. Deku had no supporters, no one who believed in him. And Katsuki, he'd made it worse. He'd told Deku to take a swan dive. Had Deku ever considered it? What if Deku had decided to take that advice, thinking the world wouldn't miss him? For the first time, Katsuki wondered why he'd treated another human being that way. Why had he needed to prove he was better? Why had he been so desperate to keep Deku beneath him? And for the first time, he questioned whether power was all that mattered. If Deku could succeed without it, if Jeanist could rise above society's expectations, then what the hell had he been doing all this time? And what kind of hero did he really want to be? Hisashi had always been a possessive person. He was older than his brother by just 2 years, but those 2 years of experience allowed him to see the world for what it truly was, broken. Discrimination has always existed, whether due to age, race, religion, political affiliation, or even identity. People feared what they couldn't understand. For Hisashi, that fear was something he had lived with every day. His stark white hair and deep red eyes marked him as different, no matter how hard his parents tried to pass it off as albinism. But albinism required DNA proof his parents didn't have. That didn't stop the whispers or the stares. His appearance made him an outcast, though he knew he was lucky compared to others. At least he didn't have visible mutations like the boy next door, born with feathers instead of hair and raptor-like claws instead of hands. That boy and his family had disappeared one night, leaving behind only graffiti on their door, no mutant freaks allowed. Hisashi had thought he was safe from further judgment as long as he didn't develop a meta ability. He was wrong. When his younger brother, Yoichi, was born, he was frail and sickly, arriving 2 months early. Yoichi's tiny heart struggled to beat, and he nearly died 4 times before he could leave the hospital. While their parents visited sporadically, it was Hisashi who came every day, bringing flowers for the nurses and sitting by the incubator to talk to Yoichi. In those quiet moments, he vowed to protect his little brother. Their parents' weariness only grew after Yoichi came home. Rumors spread that their family had produced another freak, and their home was soon attacked. A gang broke in, targeting their mother. Hisashi's father managed to fend them off, but the damage was done. Their mother was left nearly beaten to death. The family fled in the dead of night. Hisashi watched as his parents' spirits broke. They became distant, burdened by fear and exhaustion. It was then that Hisashi took it upon himself to be Yoichi's protector. At 8 years old, Hisashi discovered he had a meta ability. He and Yoichi were walking to buy a comic book when they were attacked by a man with a destructive meta ability. When the man knocked Yoichi down, something in Hisashi snapped. He reached out to help the man up, and suddenly, holes opened in his palms. The man's ability flowed into Hisashi like a torrent of energy, leaving the man powerless. Hisashi felt an overwhelming euphoria. It took several more incidents to fully understand his ability. He could take others' abilities and, later, discovered he could also give them away. His parents deemed his ability too much. They distanced themselves further, leaving Hisashi to figure it out on his own. What started as a desperate struggle to survive transformed into something else. He began taking abilities from those who didn't want them, giving them to those who did, and building a network of favors. He enjoyed the power, the control. But despite his growing influence, he wasn't happy. Yoichi was still fragile, and Hisashi still felt alone. Near his 30th birthday, Yoichi suffered a heart attack. Panicked, Hisashi searched for a way to save him. He heard of an ability that could stockpile energy and strengthen the user. It was perfect. He took the ability and gave it to Yoichi, hoping it would make him stronger. But he hadn't realized Yoichi had an ability of his own. The combination changed Yoichi, igniting a fire in him to use his powers to fight crime, just like the heroes in his beloved comics. Yoichi's newfound independence terrified Hisashi. When Yoichi ran away, Hisashi searched for months before finding him. He brought Yoichi back and locked him in an old atomic bomb shelter, desperate to keep him safe. But Yoichi refused to be caged. He was rescued by the leader of a resistance movement, a group that branded Hisashi as a demon emperor who sought to strip everyone of their abilities. They didn't understand. He didn't want to take everyone's abilities, only those that didn't deserve them. But they wouldn't listen. In the chaos, Yoichi died. Hisashi held his brother's lifeless body, grief-stricken. Then he felt it, the ability he'd given Yoichi transferring to someone else. That piece of his brother wasn't gone after all. He became obsessed, chasing the ability as it passed from one person to the next. By the time he reached the eighth wielder, he was a shadow of his former self, consumed by his hunger for power and his need to reclaim what he'd lost. When the ninth wielder of Yoichi's ability came to him willingly, it was a trap. The boy's ability fused with Yoichi's, creating an unstable force that began destroying them both. As Hisashi stared at the ruined moon of the strange dimension they'd been sent to, he wondered if any of it had been worth it. Yoichi had once loved his brother. Or at least, he thought he had. Family was supposed to love each other, wasn't it? But love had felt suffocating when it came from Hisashi. As a child, Yoichi had been sickly, coddled, and sheltered to the point of isolation. While other children played outside, he was confined indoors, allowed only to read. He devoured comic books, dreaming of becoming a hero. He wanted to be more than just the fragile, sickly boy everyone pitied. His dreams didn't fade, even after his family was attacked and his parents kicked them out. Hisashi's warnings about the world fell on deaf ears. Yoichi clung to his hope, even as he watched his brother use his ability to build an empire. When Hisashi forced an ability onto him, Yoichi's love turned to resentment. He hated his brother for trying to control him, for seeing him as something to protect rather than someone to understand. When he escaped, Yoichi felt free for the first time. But freedom was short-lived. Hisashi found him, locked him away, and tried to break his spirit. Yoichi refused to give in. He starved himself, determined to let the ability die with him. Then he was rescued, and in his desperation, he transferred the ability to his savior. He died soon after, only to find himself in a strange, empty place with the man who had saved him. Together, they watched the ability pass on, generation after generation. Yoichi hoped each new wielder would succeed where he and his savior had failed. But as the years turned into decades, hope turned to despair. The cycle seemed endless. When the ninth wielder confronted Hisashi, Yoichi dared to believe the end was near. But the boy's ability fused with his and Hisashi's, destabilizing everything. As Yoichi looked at the ruined moon of this new dimension, he felt a bittersweet relief. Perhaps, finally, it was over. If someone had told Karasuma Tadayami that by the time he hit 40, he'd be a father, a husband, and the president of a government agency, he would have laughed in their face. The idea of trading covert missions and assassination training for politics and family life would have sounded absurd. Yet here he was, living a life so far removed from his expectations that even his younger self wouldn't recognize him. And he wouldn't trade it for anything. It had all started with a mission one he would never have taken under normal circumstances. But that mission had led him to Irina Jelavic, his now wife, and the kids of Class 1E, who had wrapped themselves around his heart tighter than any garrote ever could. They weren't just students, they were his family. Their resilience, their growth, and their unyielding determination to rise above their circumstances had inspired him in ways he hadn't thought possible. When the world of quirks revealed itself to be as flawed as it was extraordinary, Karasuma found himself stepping into a new kind of battlefield, politics. Being quirkless in a society that idolized superpowers was no small hurdle, but Karasuma wasn't one to back down from a challenge. Drawing on the skills he'd honed as a government agent and assassin trainer, strategic thinking, negotiation, and an uncanny ability to read people, he climbed the ranks with quiet determination. Becoming HPSC president wasn't just a career milestone, it was a chance to reshape the hero society that had long been broken. He implemented reforms that prioritized accountability and fairness over blind hero worship. It wasn't easy facing opposition from those who believed power equaled worth, but Karasuma's resolve never wavered. He had faced death too many times to be intimidated by political games. Now, as he stood in his office overlooking the cityscape, Karasuma felt something unfamiliar: contentment. His days were filled with purpose, whether it was drafting policies to protect civilians or coming home to Irina's sharp wit and their children's laughter. For the first time in his life, Karasuma wasn't just surviving, he was living. He thought back to the kids of one, their faces etched into his memory like scars from an old battle. They had taught him what it meant to fight not just for survival but for a future worth having. And as he looked ahead, Karasuma knew one thing for certain: every step of this unexpected journey had been worth it. Aizawa Shouta had never considered himself a person who dwelled on regrets. What's done is done had been his mantra for years. Yet, as he sat in the principal's office of Koro Sensei's School of Heroics, he found himself haunted by the choices of his past. His mind drifted to Midoriya Izuku, the boy he had almost expelled due to his assassination training. Sometimes, while he stared at his coffee, he could still hear the argument he'd had with Hisashi. He could hear himself say that he couldn't train someone that didn't want to be in heroics when he had 19 other students. And yet, he could have. He knows he could have. He could have put more thought and effort into everything he did while a teacher at UA. The apology tour he'd had to go on after everything had happened had opened his eyes to that fact. The weight of all those students he had expelled over the years pressed down on him like a physical force. Some had turned to villainy, their potential for good twisted by bitterness and rejection. Others became vigilantes, operating in the shadows of a society that had cast them aside. But the ones that truly kept him awake at night were those who had simply disappeared. How many lives had he cut short with his ruthless logic? Now, as the principal of a school that embraced the potential in every student, Aizawa found himself at a crossroads. The logical part of his mind argued that his past actions had been necessary, a way to weed out those unfit for the dangers of hero work. But his heart, so long ignored in favor of cold reason, ached with the knowledge of lives altered and dreams shattered. Aizawa Shouta, the man who had prided himself on never looking back, now found himself unable to escape the shadows of his past. As he gazed out the window at the students training below, he silently vowed to do better, to see the potential in every child, to nurture rather than judge, and to ensure that no student under his care would ever feel the sting of unwarranted rejection again. If you'd ever asked a younger Midoriya Izuku if he would be happy being quirkless, he'd have vehemently denied it. Back then, he'd been a weak crybaby, a pushover, every negative trait Katsuki had ever accused him of embodying. Yet now, as he stood on the precipice of a new life, Izuku found himself surprisingly at peace with the absence of one for all's power singing through his veins. The sacrifice of his quirk had been a pivotal moment, one that had reshaped not just his future but the very fabric of two worlds. As one for all and all for one vanished into the same otherworldly realm that had once claimed Izuku himself, he felt a strange sense of completion. The burden of being the world's savior had lifted, leaving behind a young man who was finally free to define himself on his terms. His relationship with his mother remained complicated. Her initial lack of support had cut deep, and her decision to relinquish custody to Karasuma had been a turning point Izuku never saw coming. Yet, as he matured, he began to understand the fear that had driven her actions. Their interactions now were tentative, laden with unspoken regrets, but also tinged with a cautious hope for reconciliation. All Might's reaction to Izuku's assassin training had been another hurdle. The symbol of peace had balked at the idea of his successor knowing the art of killing. All Might had eventually come around, and he still visited sometimes, if only to give lectures about the things he'd done both wrong and right in a 40-year career in heroics. Now, surrounded by his newfound family in the world of assassins and heroes, Izuku felt a contentment he'd never known before. Here, he wasn't judged by the power he wielded or the expectations placed upon him. He was valued for his strategic mind, his unwavering determination, and his ability to inspire others, traits that had always been his true strengths. As he looked around at the faces of those who had accepted him, Karasuma, Irina, his classmates from 1E, Izuku realized that he had found something more precious than any quirk, a place where he truly belonged. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in his life, Midoriya Izuku was excited to face the future as simply himself: no powers, no destiny, just a boy with an unbreakable spirit and a heart full of hope. He looked up at the full moon and swore for a second. He sees Koro Sensei's smiling face, telling him he has done well, telling him he's proud of him.
Okay, sadly the chapter is over, and if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like, and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.